Welcome back to Potter Read. Today's story, an ancient goblin treaty crowned Harry Lord of the Deep Vaults at age 6. If you're enjoying the channel, take a second to smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a tale. Now let's begin. Chapter 1, The Ledger That Woke Number 4, Privet Drive, kept its clocks the way some men kept their tempers, which was to say loudly and slightly ahead of everyone else. The one in the hall gained 90 seconds a week. Harry had worked this out at 5.5, timing it against the milk float and the 9 o'clock chimes from the church 2 streets over, and he had told no one, because being right was a thing that got taken away from you at that house if you said it aloud. He was 6 now. He knelt on the cold tile of the kitchen floor with a dustpan and a wet cloth, and he studied the way the morning light fell through the window over the sink. It came in as a long bar and struck the edge of a water glass on the draining board, and where it struck, it broke. A little smear of color lay across the white cupboard door, red at the bottom, then orange, then a thin green that faded up into a blue you could only see if you tilted your head and stopped expecting it to be there. Rainbow, Aunt Petunia would have said if she had said anything to him at all. But Harry had noticed that the colors always came in the same order, the way the numbers on the cooker dial always climbed in the same order, and he had decided that meant the light was not being careless. It was obeying something. He liked things that obeyed something. It meant there was a rule underneath, and if you were patient and quiet you could find the rule, and once you had it, nobody could take it away from you by shouting. "Are you finished, or are you going to kneel there worshipping the sink?" said Aunt Petunia. "Finished," Harry said, and he was, because he had finished 4 minutes ago and had been using the extra 4 minutes on the light. He stood. He put the dustpan back in the cupboard under the stairs, past the thin mattress and the broken slinky in the shelf where he kept the 3 things that were his. A bottle cap, a marble with a twist of white in it like a frozen breath, and a chess pawn he had found in the gutter and had never told anyone about, because a single pawn is not a chess set and cannot be confiscated for being a chess set. He shut the cupboard door. The latch clicked. He had oiled the latch himself with a smear of butter so that it would not squeak when he opened it at night, and this too he had told no one. Dudley was at the table eating the last of the bacon in a way that involved his whole face. Uncle Vernon was behind the newspaper, and the newspaper trembled slightly with the force of a man reading about interest rates. On the wall, Aunt Petunia's spider plant sent down its little green paratroopers, and one of them Harry saw had grown a root in the night that reached toward the window and not toward the light bulb, which was interesting, because the light bulb had been on all evening and the window had been dark, and a plant that grew toward the memory of the sun rather than toward the lamp in front of it was a plant that knew something the room did not. "Boy," said Uncle Vernon from behind the rates. It was Harry's other name. "Yes, Uncle Vernon, Mrs. Figgs got her hip. You'll be here today, and you'll not be underfoot." Yes, Uncle Vernon. It suited Harry to not be underfoot. Underfoot was where the shouting lived. He took a slice of toast that no one wanted, because the crust was burnt on one corner, and he carried it out into the square of back garden and sat on the upturned bucket by the runner beans, and he ate the good 3/4 of the toast slowly to make it last, and he thought about the plant that grew toward a sun it could not see. There was a great deal that Harry did not know on that particular Tuesday in the summer of his 6th year. He did not know that he was famous. He did not know that a scar shaped like a stroke of lightning sat under his fringe because a man had tried to kill him and had failed at it in a way that had never been fully explained to anyone, least of all to the men who studied such things for a living. He did not know his mother's name had been Lily, or that she had died with her arms around him, or that his father's name had been James, or that the name Potter meant something in rooms he had never been allowed into. The Dursleys had told him his parents died in a car crash and that he ought to be grateful for the roof, and Harry had noticed, with the same attention he gave the clock and the light and the plant, that this story had no details in it. Car crashes had details. Where, when, what kind of car? The story of his parents was a door with no room behind it, and a 6-year-old who has learned to read the whole newspaper by candlelight under the stairs knows the difference between a locked door and a painted one. The last of the toast gone, he stayed on the bucket and watched the bar of afternoon light that had crept round the house and now lay across the concrete path, and he did the thing he sometimes did when he was alone and certain of being alone, which was to hold out one finger into the light and try to feel it. He had a theory that light had a weight, a very small one, too small for a person to notice unless the person went very still and stopped wanting to notice anything else, and he had never once managed to feel it, and he tried anyway, because a theory you have not disproved is a theory you are allowed to keep. He held his finger in the warm bar of it. He emptied his head of the clock and the plant and the plate he would have to wash, and the light bent. It was not much. A person looking would have said a cloud had moved, except that there were no clouds, and the sky over Privet Drive was the flat washed blue of a July that had run out of weather. The bar of light on the path drew itself in toward his finger the way iron filings draw toward a magnet under paper, gathered to a bright point at the tip of it, and for the space of 3 of Harry's slow heartbeats it sat there, a coin of pure daylight balanced on his fingernail, warm as a held breath, and Harry looked at it and did not move and did not want anything except for it to stay. Then a door banged somewhere inside the house, and the wanting nothing broke, and the light let go and lay back down flat across the concrete, ordinary, obedient, a bar of sun on a path in Surrey. Harry lowered his hand. He turned it over and looked at the fingertip, which was only a fingertip. He was not frightened, because he had learned young that being frightened of a thing was a way of admitting you had not understood it yet, and he did not intend to admit that about the light. He was something else, something he had no word for and would not have said aloud if he had, a lifting under the ribs like the first foot of a swing going up. Things obeyed rules. He had always believed that. It had never before occurred to him that he might be one of the things a rule would obey. He sat with that on the upturned bucket while the midges came up, and he decided, in the careful way he decided everything, that he would tell no one, and that he would try again, and that he would not try again where a window could see him, because the last child on Privet Drive who had done an impossible thing where a window could see had been Harry 8 months ago, when a jumper had shrunk on the way to his neck, and he had spent a week in the cupboard for it, and he had learned from that too. So he did not press. He got up off the bucket and carried the crumbs of the crust into the bin. And several hundred miles to the north, and a very great deal further down, beneath a city he had never seen, a seal that had held its silence for 374 winters began, without any sound a human ear could catch, to break. The deep archive of Gringotts lay below the 9th cavern, past the dragon ward, at the foot of a stair that the tellers upstairs called the 1000th stair, though no one had counted the steps in living memory, and the number was thought by the older reckoners to be a courtesy rather than a census. Here the air was dry and cold, and smelled of iron and old wax, and the particular mineral patience of stone that has never seen the sun. Here the ledgers of the nation were kept, not the trade ledgers of the upper floors with their columns of galleons and their fussy quills, but the deep books, the treaties, the concordats, the blood bonds and the wergilds, the accountings that were older than the statute of secrecy, and in some cases older than the wizard's memory of having made them. Skarnock, keeper of the deep archive and master reckoner of the undermost tier, was not a goblin given to alarm. He had held his post for 119 years, and before that he had spent 40 years learning it, and a goblin who has spent 159 years in the same cold rooms has generally seen whatever there is to see and has stopped expecting the walls to surprise him. So when the 9th shelf of the Concordat aisle gave off a sound like a struck bell heard through a wall of wool, Skarnock did not startle. He set down his stylus. He looked up. And he listened to the quiet after the sound, which told him more than the sound had. "Griffhook," he said. The young teller came at a run from the cataloguing desk, which was a discourtesy because one did not run in the deep archive, but Griffhook was 91 and a goblin of Skarnock's age that was scarcely out of the shell. "Master Reckoner, you heard it." "I heard something, Master Reckoner. I thought a strongbox had settled." "Strongboxes do not settle. Stone settles. Debts come due." Skarnock took the lamp from its hook. It was a goblin lamp, and it burned without smoke, and its light was the color of a coin held to a candle. "Bring the register of the 9th shelf, and walk." They walked. The Concordat aisle ran back into the dark for a distance that the upper tellers would not have believed, and that Skarnock did not think about, because thinking about the true dimensions of the deep archive was a discipline reserved for those who had made peace with the fact that the nation's memory was larger than the nation. The shelves rose past the reach of the lamp. On each shelf lay the bound accords, each in its case of lead and cedar, each with its spine tag lettered in the deep script that wizards were not taught and had never troubled to learn. The 9th shelf held the concordats of the age of King Urgok, and near the middle of it, in a case of black lead with a hasp of red gold, lay a book that had given off, in Skarnock's tenure, precisely no sound at all until this morning. He set the lamp on the reading ledge. He drew on the gray gloves. He lifted the case down with both hands, and it was heavier than a book that size had any business being, because it was not only a book. The Concordat of the deep vaults, Skarnock read from the spine tag, though he had known the shape of the words before the lamp reached them. Sealed the 12th of October in the wizard's reckoning, the year 1612, the 4th year of the reign of Urgok, king under the mountain, may his accounts be balanced. He opened the case. The book inside was bound in a skin no wizard could have named, and its clasp was a disc of gold with 9 impressions set around its rim like the hours on a clock face with 3 hours missing. 8 of the impressions were dark, filled, spent. The 9th was bright. The 9th was singing very faintly, the last of the note that had rung through the archive, and as Skarnock watched, a hairline of gold light traced itself around that 9th seal and then sank, the way a struck ripple sinks back into still water, and was gone. Griffhook had stopped a respectful pace behind. "Master Reckoner, what is it?" "It is a clock," Skarnock said. "That has just told the time." He set his gloved finger a hair's breadth from the 9th seal and did not touch it. This accord was sealed with 9 seals against 9 conditions. 8 of those conditions were met and spent in their seasons over 3 centuries, and each in its turn darkened. The 9th was set against a season no goblin then living expected to see, and it was left bright, and it was left to sleep. It has woken. That means the season has come. He turned, and the lamp threw his shadow long up the shelves. Bring me the reckoning slate and the concordance of the house of Potter. We are going to find out what we have promised, and to whom, and whether they are alive to be told. The reading of an old accord is not like the reading of a new one. A new accord means what it says. An old accord means what it says, and also what it meant when it was said, and also what has happened to every word in it in the years between, and a master reckoner who has forgotten this has forgotten his trade. Skarnok read the concordat of the deep vaults through once at speed, to take its shape, and then a second time slowly, with the slate at his elbow and the stylus moving, and by the second reading the shape of the thing had begun to frighten him, which was a sensation he had not had cause to name in 90 years and did not name now. Clause the first set down the debt. In the unrest of the years 1611 and 12, when wizard raiders had come by night against the deep holds and against the goblin steadings above ground, one wizard of the surface had done the nation 3 services. He had opened his hall to the goblin younglings and the deep pledgers, and hidden them from the raiders under his own roof at risk of his own name. He had ridden after the raiders who bore off the girdle of Ragnuk, a thing of worked gold that the nation had wept to lose, and he had taken it back from them and carried it down to the gates of the mountain and given it into goblin hands and asked for nothing. And when the king, ashamed to be so served by a wizard, had offered him a weight of gold to settle the account and be quit of him, the wizard had refused the gold, and had said a thing that was written into the clause in the old script and then again beneath it in the wizard's letters so that there could be no mistaking it. Gold pays for goods. It does not pay for kindness. Keep your gold and keep faith with me, and we are square. Hardwin Potter, Skarnok read from the signature line, and beside it, in a hand grown formal with the weight of the moment, Urgok, King under the Mountain. And beneath both, the drafter's mark, Bathrock Ironred, Undermaster of the Deep, who wrote this and will answer for every word of it. A wizard refused gold, Griffith said, and there was in his young voice the particular disbelief of a teller who spent his days watching wizards want gold the way drowning men want air. A wizard refused gold, Skarnok agreed, and put King Urgok in a debt that gold could not close, which is the most dangerous thing a person can do to a goblin, and Hardwin Potter appears to have known it. Read on, it gets worse. Clause the third answered the debt, and it answered it not in coin but in bond, because that was the only coin the king had left to pay in. It bound 13 of the deep vaults, the vaults of the undermost tier that lay below the 1000th stair, to the line of Potter and Warden's trust, not in ownership. The clause was precise on this, and Skarnok read the precision twice and set his stylus down to be sure of it. The vaults were not given to the Potters. The Potters could not sell them, could not empty them, could not carry off so much as a single coin of what lay within, for what lay within was not theirs. What was given was the wardenship, the keeping, the standing, the seat. The Potter heir was named in the clause Warden of the Deep Vaults, and the clause noted, with the dry exactness that Skarnok recognized as Bathrock's own hand across 3 centuries, that the surface wizards would likely render this style as a lordship, Lord of the Deep Vaults, and that the nation did not object to their doing so, provided every goblin who spoke it understood that a lord among wizards commands and a warden among goblins answers, and that these were not the same office wearing 2 hats but 2 offices that happened to rhyme. They will hear the word Lord, Skarnok said, half to himself, and they will hear a fortune with a coronet on it, and they will come. He did not yet know who they would be. He did not need to. In 159 years underground, he had learned that the smell of an unclaimed title travels upward through solid rock faster than heat. Clause the 7th was the one that had rung the bell. It set the blood term, the condition against which the 9th seal had been left bright and sleeping, and it read in the wizard's letters beneath the deep script. The wardenship shall fall to the first heir of Potter blood, unblemished by any oath broken, living in the year of the reckoning, and the wardenship may fall upon a child, and shall not wait upon the child's growing, for the deep does not count years as wizards do, and a bond does not ripen faster for a gray beard than for a milk tooth. Skarnok read it a 3rd time. Then he took up the concordance of the House of Potter, the goblin record of that wizard line kept current by the upper archive as a matter of course for every family that banked with the nation, and he ran his gloved finger down the last of its pages, past the marriages and the deaths and the small trust vault openings, down to the most recent hand, which was fresh, not 2 years cold, and which recorded in the neutral ink of a teller who had felt nothing while writing it that James Potter and Lily Potter of Godric's Hollow were dead, killed on the last night of October in the year 1981, and that their vault and its trust had passed to their sole issue, a son, Harry James Potter, Skarnok Reed, born the 31st of July, 1980, living. He set the concordance down beside the concordat, the fresh page beside the ancient one, and he looked at the 2 of them lying together on the reading ledge in the coin-colored light, and the arithmetic assembled itself in him without his willing it, the way arithmetic did. The year of the reckoning is this year, the heir is living, The heir is unblemished by any broken oath because the heir is 6 years old and has not yet had the opportunity to break one. The blood term is met. The ninth seal has woken because there is, at this hour, a warden of the deep vaults walking on the surface of the world, and he does not know it, and neither, until this morning, did we. Griffith stood very still. Master Reckoner, a child. A child, said Skarnok, to whom the nation stands in a debt 374 years deep, sealed 9 times and never once dishonored, because in 374 years the nation has done many things it might blush at but has never yet broken a sealed bond, and I will be melted for scrap before it starts today with a boy of 6. He closed the concordance. He did not close the concordat. Fetch me the under-reckoner. Fetch me a runner to the directorate. In Griffith, he looked at the young teller, and the lamp made 2 small coins of his eyes. Say nothing above the 9th cavern, not to a teller, not to a cousin, not to the walls. When word of this goes up, and it will, I want it to go up in the order I choose, to the persons I choose, or it will go up the wrong way and cost a great deal that no vault holds. Griffith went. Skarnok stood alone in the aisle with the woken book, and for a moment, only a moment, he permitted himself the discourtesy of resting his gloved hand flat on the cold lead case, the way one rests a hand on the shoulder of a comrade who has come back from a place he was not expected to survive. Then he took it up and carried it to the sealed reading room, because a woken accord was not to be left lying, and because he wanted the door shut and warded before the second person in the mountain learned what the first person in the mountain now could not stop knowing. The under-reckoner came within the hour, and his name was Nardpast, and Skarnok had sent for him because the law required it and not because he wished to see him, and both goblins knew this, and neither said it, because they were goblins and not wizards, and did not mistake candor for a virtue when discretion would serve. Nardpast was younger than Skarnok by 60 years, and hungrier by a margin that could not be measured in years at all. He had risen fast through the reckoning houses on a genuine gift for the deep accounts and an equally genuine conviction, which he wore under his courtesy the way a blade is worn under a coat, that the nation had for too long let the surface wizards borrow its dignity at no interest. He read the concordat where Skarnok said it before him, and he read it well, because whatever else was true of Nardpast, he was no fool, and did not pretend to virtues he lacked in place of the ones he had. When he had finished, he sat back, and he folded his long fingers, and he looked at the woken 9th seal with an expression that Skarnok had seen on the faces of upper tellers watching a rich client's coffin go by. A wizard child, Nardpast said, is to be styled warden of the deep vaults, to hold standing in the mountain, to take a seat that goblins have kept empty and swept and warded for 374 years, waiting on the pleasure of a milk tooth. To hold the standing his forebear bought, Skarnok said, with a service the king could not repay in gold and would not insult by trying to. Yes, the forebear is bones, the service is a story, the gold that was refused is 3 centuries spent. The bond is not spent. The seal woke. You read it wake. Nardpast was quiet. He was too intelligent to argue with a seal, and too proud to pretend the argument he wanted to make was a legal one when it was not. When he spoke again, he had shifted his ground, which Skarnok respected even as he watched for the next foothold. I do not say we break it. I would not say that. I am not a child and I am not a wizard. I say only that a bond can be honored in more ways than one, and that the letter of clause the 3rd gives us latitude, the letter of clause the 7th does not close. Warden's trust, it says. The wardenship falls upon the heir. It does not say the mountain must fetch the heir to his seat with lamps and a procession while he is yet a child who cannot ward a vault or answer a claim or defend a standing he does not understand. Let the seal wake. Let the heir be warden in name as the letter requires, and let the nation hold the vaults in his stead in his interest under his style until he is grown enough to know what he holds. He spread his hands. That is not dishonor, that is stewardship. It is what we do for any minor heir whose vault we hold. It was, Skarnok reflected, a very good argument, and it was wrong, and the reason it was wrong was subtle enough that a lesser reckoner might have missed it, and Nardpast had counted on that, and Nardpast had miscounted, because the reckoner across the table from him was not lesser. 2 things, Skarnok said. Read them from the book, do not take them from me. Clause the 9th, the reckoning. It sets the manner of the investiture, and it uses a word that your steward's plan cannot swallow. It says the heir shall answer the 9th seal, not be recorded against it, not be named to it in his absence by well-meaning stewards who hold his interest in trust. Answer it, with his blood and with his word. The seal does not wake to a name written in a ledger under reckoner. It woke because the child is alive to answer it, and it will not sleep again, and it will not be answered by proxy, because the goblins who said it were not fools, and they built it precisely to prevent the thing you have just very ably proposed. Nardpast's fingers did not move, which told Skarnok he had landed the blow. And the second thing is clause the 11th, which you did not mention, and which I think you read because you read everything. Skarnok turned the pages with his gloved hand and set his finger on it. The reversion. If no heir answers the reckoning before the deep tide turns thrice from the waking of the seal, the wardenship lapses and the vaults revert. Your steward's plan does not merely delay the child's investiture. It runs the clock against clause the 11th. Hold the vaults in his stead, you say, until he is grown. But he cannot be grown before the tide turns thrice. The tide turns thrice in a season. If we do not bring the child to answer the seal within the season, the wardenship does not pass to the nation in trust. It lapses. An elapsed wardenship is a door left open, and I have banked wizards long enough to know that an open door with a fortune behind it does not stay empty and does not stay ours. For a long moment Nargpass studied the clause, and Skarnak led him, because he wanted the Underreckoner to arrive at the truth by his own road, so that he could not later pretend he had been marched there. When Nargpass looked up, his face had composed itself into the flat courtesy that was, Skarnak knew, the most honest expression he owned. Then we are agreed, Nargpass said, that the child must be brought. We are agreed that the child must be brought. We are not agreed, Nargpass said, rising, smoothing the front of his coat, on what he is once he is here. And he inclined his head the exact number of degrees that Skarnak's rank required, and not 1 degree more, and he left the sealed reading room, and Skarnak sat with the woken book and understood that the first of the covetors had already declared himself, and that he wore the nation's own coat, and that this was going to be the hard kind of trouble, and not the easy kind. Word went up the way Skarnak had ordered it, which is to say to the Directorate and to no one else, and the Directorate met that night in the round chamber under the second cavern, and Ragnok, High Chieftain, first among the 12, heard the Concordat read aloud in full while the other 11 sat in the dark beyond the lamp and made no sound. Ragnok was old even by the standard of the deep, and he had the stillness of a goblin who has learned that most decisions are made worse by the addition of haste. When the reading was done, he did not speak at once. He looked at the woken seal which had been carried up under guard for the Directorate to witness, and he looked at the fresh page of the Potter Concordance laid beside it, and he asked one question, which was the question of a chieftain and not of a reckoner. Is the debt just, chieftain? You have told me the debt is sealed. I did not ask if it was sealed. I asked if it was just. A bond can be sealed and be a robbery. A king in fear can seal away his people's inheritance to a flatterer and call it honor. I have read of it. So I ask the master reckoner, who has read the whole of it and not merely the parts that ring, is this debt just? Did the wizard earn what the mountain promised, or did a frightened king overpay for a night's shelter and leave us the bill? It was, Skarnak thought, the right question, and it was the reason Ragnok was chieftain and Nargpass was not, and it was the reason he did not resent answering it, though he had answered its cousin all day. Chieftain, I have waited. A weight of gold was offered and refused. The service was rendered at the wizard's own risk, in a season when to shelter goblins was to be named Goblin Friend and lose standing among his own kind, which in that age cost more than gold. The girdle of Ragnok was returned when the raiders who held it could have been left to melt it, and no ransom was asked. And the words of the refusal are in the book in his own hand, and they are not the words of a flatterer. A flatterer takes the gold and asks for more. This wizard refused the gold and asked for faith, and King Urgok, who was no fool and no coward, judged that faith the dearer price and paid it. In the one coin the mountain never counterfeits. I judge the debt just. I would stake my post on it. I have in a manner already staked it, for I have told the Underreckoner so to his face. Ragnok was quiet again. Then in the dark beyond the lamp one of the 11 spoke, and it was an old voice, a female voice, dry as the archive itself, and she said only, the seal woke. The debt is the mountain's, whether it is just or not, for we sealed it, and we are not wizards to unsay our seals when the season turns inconvenient. The question of justice is a comfort, chieftain, and I am glad of the comfort, but we would owe this whether we were comforted or not. We would, Ragnok said. Thank you, Grinda. It is well to be both bound and glad of it. It is rare. He set his hands flat on the stone before him. Then the finding of the Directorate is this. The Concordat of the deep vaults is woken, and shall be honored to its letter and its spirit both, which are, I am told, at odds in the mouth of at least one of my reckoners, and that we will attend to in its season. The heir Harry James Potter shall be brought to the mountain to answer the 9th seal within the turning of 3 tides, as clause the 9th requires and clause the 11th compels. He shall be brought lawfully, with courtesy, and with an escort of the deep archive and not of the upper floors, for this is a matter of the deep and not of the counting-house. Master Reckoner Skarnak will go himself, for he has read the whole of it and will answer for every word of it, as Bathrock Ironred answered before him. The old chieftain's eyes moved to Skarnak and rested there. You wrote that phrase into your slate today. I read it in your report. You are aware you have bound yourself with it. I am aware, chieftain. Good. A reckoner who binds himself reads more carefully. One more thing. Ragnok lifted a single finger, and it was enough to still the whole chamber, though no one had been moving. The child is 6. Whatever he becomes to us, and whatever we become to him, and whatever war of coats and clauses grows up around his head in the seasons to come, he is 6, and he did not ask for any of this, and neither did we, and a nation that cannot be honorable to a child it did not choose is a nation that has mistaken its ledgers for its soul. Bring him gently. Frighten him if you must with the truth, for the truth is frightening, but do not frighten him with us. We keep our word. Let the keeping of it be the first thing he learns of the mountain, because it is the truest thing, and because he will need to know it before the season is out. He rose, and the 11 rose in the dark, and the meeting was ended, and the woken book was carried back down under guard to the sealed reading room, and the mountain, having decided, turned to the doing. Above them, in a garden in Surrey where the arithmetic of the deep meant nothing at all, Harry sat on his upturned bucket until the light left the runner beans and the midges came up out of the grass. And then he went in and washed the plate no one had thanked him for washing, and he lay down on the thin mattress in the cupboard under the stairs with the door open 1 inch for the air, and he took out the marble with the frozen breath inside it and held it up to the strip of hall light and turned it. And watched the white twist inside it turn. He was thinking, as he often thought before sleep, about the plant that grew toward a sun it could not see, and he had arrived that evening at a conclusion that pleased him, and that he decided he would keep, along with the clock and the light and the old latch, in the place where he kept the things that were true and that no one could take. The conclusion was this, that a thing could know where the sun was even in a dark room, if the sun had shone on it long enough once, a long time ago, before the room. And Harry, who had been told his parents died in a car crash with no details in it, and who had never in his 6 years been told a single true thing about where he came from, lay in the dark and turned the marble and did not know that he had just described himself. He only knew that the idea felt like a key, though he could not have said to what door, and that holding it made the cupboard feel, for a moment, less like a cupboard, and more like the inside of something that was about to open. He slept. The clock in the hall ran 90 seconds fast toward a morning it could not imagine. And 400 miles to the north and a great deal further down, in a sealed room where a lamp burned the color of a coin, an old goblin sat up through the night with a woken book, drafting in the deep script the summons that the letter of the law required, and that the spirit of the law in the mouth of his chieftain had commanded be gentle, and he wrote it and struck it out and wrote it again. Because he had brought bad news and good news to many wizards in his long tenure, but had never yet had to tell a 6-year-old that a nation owed him a title older than his country, and he wanted, when he said it, to get it right. By the gray hour before the archive lamps were trimmed, Scarnock had the shape of the thing he would carry to Surrey, and it was not a scroll and not a proclamation, because a proclamation would frighten a child and a scroll would be lost or burnt by whatever surface guardians the child lived among. It was a token. He had gone down himself into Vault I, the warden's vault, the seat vault of the wardenship, past wards that had not been passed in 374 years, and that knew him for who he was and led him by with a sound like a held breath released. And from the plain iron stand at the center of that vault, where it had waited under no dust because the deep does not gather dust, he had taken the warden's token. A disc of the same red gold as the Concordat's clasp, blank on one face and struck on the other with the 9-seal ring, 8 impressions dark and 1 bright, so that a person who knew how to read it would understand at a glance that here was the mark of a bond 8/9 kept and 1/9 waiting to be answered. He wrapped it in gray cloth. Put it in the inner pocket of his coat, over the place where a wizard would have said his heart was, and where a goblin would have said, more precisely, his word was kept. "Griffook," he said in the gray hour, "you will come with me to the surface. You will say nothing and you will watch everything, and you will learn how a summons of the deep is carried, for you may carry one yourself in 100 years, and there is no book that teaches it." He settled the coat. He took up the lamp and hooded it for the journey up. "We go today. The tide has turned once already while the directorate deliberated. It will not wait on us to find our courage, and neither, I think, will the persons upstairs who have by now smelled the title on the wind and are, even as we climb, deciding how to take from a child a thing that a king 3 centuries dead gave to his blood forever." He started up the 1000th stair, and Griffook came after, and behind them the sealed room held the woken book, and the 9th seal burned bright and patient in the dark, waiting, as it had waited for 374 winters, for a boy of 6 to come down and answer it. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The summons under the stairs. The knock came at 7 minutes past 4 on a Thursday, and it was not a knock that Privet Drive knew. The knocks that Privet Drive knew were the postman's double rap and the milkman's knuckle and the particular apologetic scratch of a neighbor come to complain about a hedge. This knock was 3 strokes, evenly spaced, unhurried, at a height on the door lower than a grown man's hand would naturally fall, and it had in it the sound of something that expected to be admitted and was giving the household the courtesy of a moment to decide to be sensible about it. Harry heard it from the top of the stairs, where he had been sent to fetch Dudley's other trainer and had stayed a while because the landing was cool and the shouting had not started yet. He came down 4 steps and stopped, because Aunt Petunia had gone to the door and had opened it, and Aunt Petunia had made a sound he had never heard her make, a sound like a woman stepping onto a stair that was not there. On the steps stood 2 people who were not people in the way Privet Drive counted people. The taller of the 2 came to the height of Petunia's waist. He wore a coat of a gray so dark it read as the color of slate under water, cut close and long, with buttons of a dull metal that did not catch the light so much as absorb it and give a little of it back grudgingly. His hands were folded before him. His face was long and clever and creased in a pattern that suggested the creases had been earned one careful decision at a time, and his eyes, when they moved from Petunia to the hall behind her and up unerringly to the 4 steps of stair where Harry stood, were the flat, bright color of a coin held to a candle. Behind him stood a younger one, smaller, in a plainer coat, carrying nothing and watching everything. "Mrs. Dursley," said the tall one, and his voice was dry and exact and pitched to carry no further than it needed to. "I am Scarnock of Gringotts, keeper of the deep archive. This is Griffook, a teller of the same house. We are come lawfully and by right, on a matter of record, concerning the child in your keeping who is son to James and Lily Potter. We would come in. You will find it is very much better for everyone if we come in, and I say that not as a threat, which would be beneath the occasion, but as a fact, which is my trade." For a moment Petunia stood in the doorway with her hand white on the edge of the door, and Harry watched her from the stairs and read her as he read the clock in the light. And what he read was that his aunt knew what these collars were, had always known such collars existed, and had spent a great many years hoping the knock would never come to her door. She looked back over her shoulder once at Harry on the stairs, and there was a thing in that look he had never been given before and could not name, and then it was gone and her face closed like a purse. "Vernon," she said, not loudly, "Vernon, come here." Uncle Vernon came, and Uncle Vernon did what Uncle Vernon always did with a thing he did not understand, which was to grow larger and redder and louder, and he filled the hall doorway and looked down at the 2 callers on his step and said, "Now see here. I don't know what you are, and I don't want to know, and you can take yourselves off my property before I telephone the police, do you hear?" Scarnock looked up at him with the patience of a being who has watched 3 centuries of large red men discover the limits of being large and red. "You may telephone whomever you like, Mr. Dursley. You will find, I think, that no one on the far end of that instrument has jurisdiction over the matter I have come about, which is older than your telephone and older than your police and older, if I am honest, than the road your house is built on. I have come to speak with Harry Potter, who is owed a hearing under a bond of my nation, and I will speak with him whether I do it on your doorstep, which will draw your neighbors, or in your sitting room, which will not. Choose quickly. I am courteous, but I am not idle, and there is a clock on this business that I did not set and cannot stop." It was the word neighbors that did it. Harry watched it do it. Uncle Vernon's face performed a small war between the desire to slam the door and the horror of number 6 and number 2 watching him slam a door on knee-high men in slate coats, and the horror won, as Harry had known it would, because at number 4 the neighbor's eyes were the one god the house truly feared. Vernon stepped back. The callers came in wiping their feet on the mat with a correctness that somehow made the whole thing worse for the Dursleys, and Petunia shut the door, and the hall of number 4 Privet Drive held, for the first time in its blameless pebble-dashed existence, 2 goblins and a secret. They went into the sitting room. Dudley was got out of it and sent upstairs, which Dudley resented until Scarnock looked at him once, and then Dudley went up the stairs at a speed that dislodged a picture. Harry was called down from the 4th step. He came, and he stood by the arm of the sofa where he was told to stand, and he looked at the 2 goblins with the particular attention he gave to things that obeyed rules he had not yet worked out, and Scarnock looked back at him, and something passed between the old goblin and the 6-year-old that neither of the Dursleys, sitting rigid on the settee, could see, because it was made of a currency they did not hold. "You are Harry," said Scarnock. "Yes," said Harry. "You said you came about a bond. What's a bond?" The younger goblin Griffook made a sound that he turned too late into a cough. Scarnock did not smile, because goblins did not spend smiles the way wizards did, but something moved far back in the coin-colored eyes, and he inclined his head the exact fraction that a goblin gives to a question worth answering. "A bond," he said, "is a promise with a weight on it. When you promise a thing and nothing holds you to it but your wanting to, that is a wish. When you promise a thing and there is a price for breaking it that you have agreed to pay, that is a bond. My nation makes bonds. We do not make many, because a bond you cannot keep is worse than no promise at all, and we would rather promise little and keep all of it than promise much and keep what suits us. Do you understand the difference?" Harry considered this. He thought about the old latch and the marble and the 3 true things under the stairs. "A bond is a promise you can't take back just because taking it back would be easier." "Yes," said Scarnock, and this time the thing behind his eyes came a little further forward. "That is exactly what a bond is, and it is a better definition than the one I was taught, which took 4 sentences. Sit down, Harry Potter. What I have to tell you is true, and some of it is large, and it will sit easier in you if you are sitting when it arrives." Harry sat. Not on the settee with the Dursleys, but on the floor, cross-legged, on the good carpet he was usually not allowed on, facing the 2 goblins, and no one told him to get up, because the room had passed out of the Dursleys' governance, and everyone in it knew. Scarnock took from the inner pocket of his coat a bundle of grey cloth, and he unwrapped it on the low table between them, and inside was a disc of red gold metal the size of a large coin. He set it down with 2 fingers so that the struck face showed. Around its rim ran a ring of 9 small impressions, and Harry, leaning to look, saw that 8 of them were dark, sunk, filled with a shadow that seemed to belong to the metal itself, and one of them was bright, so bright it seemed to hold a little daylight of its own down in the cold sitting room where the curtains were half drawn against the neighbors. "This is a token of the deep vaults," Skarnock said. "It is very old. It was made by a goblin named Bathrock 374 winters ago, and it has lain in a vault beneath my city all that time, and I carried it up 2 days ago to show to you, because a thing this old should be told to a person by another person and not by a letter. Look at the ring around the edge. 8 marks are dark and 1 is bright. Can you tell me what you think that means? Guess. A wrong guess costs nothing here." Harry looked at the ring for a while. The Dursleys did not exist. The room did not exist. There was only the cold, bright 9th mark and the 8 dark ones, and the rule underneath them that an adult was, for once in his 6 years, inviting him to find. "It's like a row of candles," he said slowly, "where 8 have been lit and burned down and 1 is still waiting to be lit. The dark one's already happened. The bright one hasn't happened yet." He looked up. "Is the bright one me?" There was a silence in the sitting room of number 4, Privet Drive, and into it Griffook the young teller said, quietly in the deep language, 3 words that Skarnock did not translate and that Harry would learn much later meant he reads the seal. And Skarnock, keeper of the deep archive, who had come up to Surrey braced to explain arithmetic to an infant, looked at the 6-year-old sitting cross-legged on the forbidden carpet and revised in the space of a breath a great many of the assumptions with which he had climbed the 1000th stair. "The bright one is you," he said. "Yes. Now I am going to tell you a story, and it is a true story, and it is about your family, and I think no one has told you very much that is true about your family, so listen and stop me where you do not follow, because a person who nods along to a thing he does not follow will one day sign a thing he does not follow, and my nation buries a great deal of gold that was lost exactly so." And in the half-dark sitting room, while Vernon Dursley's watch ticked and the neighbors mowed their blameless lawns outside, Skarnock told Harry the story of Hardwin Potter. He told it well because he had spent 2 nights deciding how to tell it, and he told it forensically, which suited the listener better than gentleness would have, because Harry did not want to be soothed, he wanted to know. He told of the raids of 1611, when wizards had come by night against the Goblin holds. He told of a wizard of the surface named Hardwin Potter, Harry's forebear, who had opened his own hall to hide the Goblin children and the deep books from the raiders at the risk of his own name. He told of the girdle of Ragnarok, a thing of worked gold that the raiders had carried off, and that Hardwin had ridden after and taken back and given into Goblin hands and asked nothing for. He told of the King Urgok, who had offered gold to settle the account and had been refused, and he said the words that Hardwin had said, which were written in the book, "Gold pays for goods. It does not pay for kindness. Keep your gold and keep faith with me, and we are square." And King Urgok, said Skarnock, could not let that stand. Do you understand why? A wizard had done him a kindness and refused to be paid for it. To a goblin, an unpaid kindness is a debt, and a debt you cannot close is the heaviest thing in the world, heavier than the vaults, heavier than the mountain. So the king paid in the only coin that a refused kindness can be paid in, which is faith. He bound 13 of the deepest vaults of my city to your family forever, not as a gift of the gold inside them, for that gold was never Hardwin's and is not yours, but as a trust, a keeping. He named the heir of the Potter's warden of the deep vaults, which your kind would say is lord of the deep vaults, and he sealed the bond with 9 seals against 9 conditions, and 8 of those conditions came and went across 3 centuries and were met and spent, and the 9th he set against a day he did not think he would live to see and left it bright and sleeping. And 2 days ago, Harry Potter, in a cold room under my city, the 9th seal woke. It woke because there is at last a Potter heir living in the year it was set for, a child of the blood who has broken no oath because he is too young to have sworn one, and that heir is you, and the bond is now due, and I have come to tell you that a nation you have never seen owes you a title older than your country, and that the owing is real, and that we mean to pay it because we are goblins and we keep our word. The sitting room was very quiet. Somewhere outside a lawnmower changed pitch. Harry sat on the forbidden carpet and looked at the bright 9th mark on the old gold token, and he did the thing he did with large facts, which was to break them into small ones he could pick up one at a time. "So there's a promise," he said, "an old one, and it says I'm a warden, a vault's full of things that aren't mine that I keep but can't take." He looked up. "What does a warden do if he can't take the things? What's the point of him?" "That," said Skarnock, "is the question your relatives would never have thought to ask, because they hear vault and think only of what can be carried out of it. A warden keeps, he stands for the vaults, he answers for them. When someone claims them, he is the one the claim must go through. When someone would break into them, he is the one whose standing is the wall. The vaults are not made richer by having a warden, they are made safe. You would not own what is in the deep vaults, Harry Potter. You would be the reason it stays where it belongs. Among my people, that is not a small office. It is nearer to a sacred one. We do not give it to wizards. We have given it to exactly one line of wizards once 374 years ago, because that line in the person of one man taught a king what faith cost, and the king never forgot, and neither, I promise you, have we." Harry turned the idea over. He liked it. He could not have said why he liked it so much, except that it was the opposite of everything the cupboard had taught him, which was that he was a thing to be kept out of the way, and here was an old and serious being telling him, in a voice that did not condescend, that there was a place in the world where his whole purpose would be to keep something safe. The lifting under his ribs came again, the first foot of the swing going up. He looked at the token again, at the 8 dark marks around the bright one. "You said 8 of the candles already burned, 8 things that already happened." He touched the edge of the table near the disc without touching the gold. What were they? If they mattered enough to put a seal on, somebody should still know. "Somebody does," said Skarnock, and the coin-colored eyes rested on him with something that in a wizard's face would have been approval, and in a goblin's was closer to reappraisal. "I know, it is my archive. Ask and I will tell you, because a warden who does not know the history of his own seals is a lock that has forgotten why it was cut. The first seal was spent within a year of the sealing, when Hardwin's own son came to the mountain as the bond required, and confirmed before King Urgok that his father's line accepted the trust and would not later plead ignorance of it. A bond a man makes for his heirs is not truly made until one heir, knowing, agrees to be bound. The son agreed. The first seal darkened, so a potter has stood in the deep before you, Harry. You would not be the first of your blood to walk down the 1000th stair, you would be the 9th. Harry counted on that silently, and Skarnock watched him count and did not hurry him. "The second seal," the old goblin went on, "was spent in the wizard's year 1642 in a war among your own kind, when men who were losing that war came to Gringotts to seize what gold they could to pay for it, and a potter of that day stood at the gate of the upper vaults and refused them passage and took a curse across the shoulder for it and did not move. He did not have to. The bond did not require him to bleed for us. He judged that the keeping of a thing is not only a word said in a warm room but a body put in a cold doorway, and he was right, and the second seal knew he was right, and darkened. The third was spent in a famine, when the same potter's granddaughter sent grain down into the mountain in a year. The surface would have let us starve to raise our price and asked nothing, because she had read the bond and understood that a warden's trust runs both ways, that we kept faith with her line and her line was to keep faith with us, and that faith kept only when it is easy is not faith but weather." He paused. "Shall I go on? There are 5 more, some are smaller, one is not small at all." "The one that isn't small," Harry said. "Tell me that one." "The 7th seal," said Skarnock, and for the first time his dry voice took on a weight that was almost the weight of the deep language, "was spent in the wizard's year 1811 in the last of the Goblin risings, when your own ministry made a law that would have voided every bond between goblin and wizard, ours among them, and called it the cleansing of old debts, and a potter of that day stood up in the wizard's own council, the body you call the Wisengamot, and spoke for a full turning of the glass against his own kind and his own interest, and said that a nation that unsays its bonds when they grow inconvenient has no bonds at all, only conveniences wearing the mask of law, and that he for one would keep faith with the mountain though it cost him every friend in the room, which it very nearly did. The law failed by 3 votes. Ours was one of the bonds it would have voided. The 7th seal darkened that night, and I have read the record of it 100 times, and I will tell you, Harry Potter, because you asked and because you should carry it down the stair with you. Your blood has stood in cold doorways for my nation for 300 years, and never once for gold, and that is why a token that could have been left in a drawer was carried up 1,000 steps by the keeper of the deep archive to be put in front of a child on a carpet. You are not being given a title. You are being asked to take up a keeping that 8 of your forebears already earned, 1 seal at a time, so that the 9th could be left waiting for you." He folded the gray cloth back halfway over the disc, leaving only the bright mark showing. "Now, you were about to ask me how it is done." "How do I do it?" Harry said. "How do I become the warden? You said the seal has to be answered. How do you answer a seal?" "You come to my city," said Skarnock, "and you go down beneath it, further down than any wizard but the warden's has gone in 3 centuries, to a room where the bond is kept, and you answer the 9th seal with a drop of your blood and a word of your choosing, and if the bond judges you true, it wakes to you, and you are warden, and the vaults know your name. That is the whole of it, and it is also not the whole of it, because between here and that room stand a great many people who do not want you to reach it, and I will not lie to you about them, because I have decided in the 2 days I have known you existed that you are not a person who should be lied to for his comfort." He folded his hands. "There are goblins who resent that the office should fall to a wizard child. There are wizards who covet what the vaults hold and would rather the bond lapse so they might reach for it. There is a clause in the bond, the 11th, that gives them a way to try, if they can only keep you from the room until a season has turned. So there is a clock, Harry Potter, and it is running, and I have come to ask you to come with me and answer a seal that a dead king left bright for you, before the people who would rather you did not can find a way to stop you." Harry looked at the token and at the two goblins, and then, because he was 6 and because some part of him was still a child at number 4 and always would be, he looked at his aunt. Petunia Dursley sat on the edge of the settee with her hands knotted in her lap, and her face, which Harry had seen do disapproval and anxiety and the thin, bright pleasure of a neighbor's misfortune, was doing something he had never seen it do. She was looking at the token on the table with an expression that was very close to the one Harry himself wore when he looked at the broken light on the path, the look of a person seeing against her will, a thing she had spent years insisting was not real. When she felt Harry's eyes, she flinched, and her face began to close, and then, to Harry's lasting astonishment, it stopped closing. "Your mother," Petunia said, and her voice came out wrong, rusty, as though it had not been used for that particular purpose in a long time. "Your mother could do things when we were girls. She could make a flower open in her hand. She used to sit in the garden and the light would come to her." She stopped. She looked at the bar of afternoon sun lying across the sitting room carpet, and then at Harry, and Harry understood that his aunt had, without meaning to, just confirmed the one experiment he had never dared repeat where a window could see. "I told them it wasn't real," she said. "The letters, the people like these. I told them if I never let it in the door it couldn't be real." She looked at the goblins, and something in her collapsed and set all at once into a decision. "If he goes with you." "Is he safe? You said there are people who don't want him to reach the room. Is my sister's boy safe?" And Scarnock, who had come prepared to overcome the Dursleys and found himself at the last appealed to by one of them, gave Petunia Dursley the courtesy of the truth. "No," he said, "not entirely. I will not tell you he is, because you would hear the lie in it, and then you would trust nothing else I say. He will be safer with me and my nation around him than he would be alone, and safer answering the seal than not, because a bond half-woken is more dangerous than a bond answered. But there is a clock and there are coveters, and I would be a poor guardian of him if I pretended otherwise to his aunt. I can promise you one thing, Mrs. Dursley, and it is the only thing my nation has ever been able to promise, and it has never once broken it. We will keep our word to him, whatever the word turns out to cost." Petunia looked at the token a long moment more. Then she stood and smoothed her skirt and said, in a voice she had made ordinary again by main force, "He'll need his coat, the blue one, it's on the peg." And she went out to the hall, and Harry heard her take the blue coat off the peg, the coat that had been Dudley's and was too big, and he understood that his aunt had just done the only thing she knew how to do for him, which was to make sure he did not go out into the cold underdressed, and that from Petunia Dursley this was very nearly love, and that he would think about it for the rest of his life. While the blue coat was fetched, in a village 3 miles off, an old man in a house full of clocks that all told slightly different and equally deliberate times set down his teacup and became still. Arbella Figg had sent word by the fastest of her cats an hour before, which was that 2 goblins of the Deep Archive had come to Privet Drive in a slate coat and a plain one, and that they had gone in and not come out, and that she could not follow because of her hip and her nature, and that whatever this was, it was not the ministry, and it was not the neighbors, and Albus had better know. Albus Dumbledore knew. He sat in his round office with the sleeping portraits and the instruments that measured things that had no names in English, and he turned the news over with the care of a man diffusing something he had built himself, because the arrangement at Privet Drive was his, the blood ward was his, the years of the child's quiet obscurity were his, and now the Deep had reached up under all of it and taken hold. And the Deep was the one power under Britain that Albus Dumbledore had never found a lever long enough to move. He did not, as a lesser man might, resolve to stop it. He had read enough of goblin bonds in a long life to know that a woken concordat of the Deep was not a thing to be stopped by a wizard, not even by him, and that the fastest way to turn the whole goblin nation against the child's interest was to be seen trying. He weighed, instead, the shape of the new board. A child he had meant to keep small and safe and hidden until the hour came round for other and heavier reasons was about to become, at 6, a figure of standing among the goblins, a name in a bond, a claim other men would circle. The obscurity was ending years too soon. That was a loss, and Dumbledore, who had learned across a hard century to count his losses honestly, counted it. And against it he set a colder line of reckoning, because he was a man who could love a child and calculate over his head in the same hour and be, in his own estimation, the better guardian for doing both. An heir with standing among the goblins was an heir with a wall at his back that no wizard, not Lucius Malfoy, and not the thing that had marked him and was not truly gone, could easily climb. There were worse walls to have. If the Deep was going to take the child, then the Deep would be watched and courted, and where possible turned to his good, and Albus Dumbledore would be present at the turning, because a man who cannot stop a tide can still choose to be standing where it comes ashore. He wrote 2 letters. The first was to Gringotts, to the Directorate, courteous and exact, requesting under the old liaison protocols that an observer of the Wisengamot be permitted to attend the reckoning of the Potter heir, as was any minor's right in a matter touching his estate. It was a reasonable request, and he knew it would be granted, and he knew the goblins would know exactly why he made it, and that the knowing was part of the courtesy. the second letter he did not send. He wrote it to himself in the private cipher he used for the accounts he kept only in his own hand, and it said in effect that the child was leaving the shelter he had built years before its walls had finished their work, and entering a weather he could not fully control, and that the correct response to losing control of a thing you love is not to clutch it tighter, which breaks it, but to make yourself worth having near it, which keeps you in the room. Then he burned the second letter and fed his phoenix, and went to arrange to be in the room. He was not the only one arranging. The upper floors of Gringotts are discreet, but they are not sealed, and a token carried up from the deep and a directorate met in the night, and a master reckoner absent from his archive for 2 days are the kind of stones whose ripples reach the surface. And by the Thursday that Scarnock sat on the Dursleys' carpet, the ripples had reached a narrow office on the 4th floor of the Ministry of Magic, in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, where a man named Prosper Vane read a liaison clerk's memorandum twice, and then a third time, and then set it down very precisely square to the edge of his blotter, because Prosper Vane was a man who kept his edges square, and squared edges were how he thought. Vane was deputy head of the Office of Escheat and Estates, which was a small office and an old one, and in the view of most of the ministry, a dull one concerned with the disposition of magical property that fell out of ownership. The vaults of extinct lines, the estates with no heir, the enchanted goods that the law called bona vacantia, ownerless things, which the old statute said reverted in the end to the crown, and which the ministry, being the crown's instrument in matters magical, administered. It was a dull office to most men because most men saw only the dust of it. Prosper Vane saw the leverage. He had spent 11 years learning precisely which vaults in Britain hung by a thread of a single life or a single unmet condition, and here, in a liaison clerk's careless memorandum, was a thread of a kind he had never dreamed to find. 13 vaults of the deep tier, sealed under an ancient Goblin concordat, the wardenship of which turned on a clause and a clock, and the survival of a claim that a 6-year-old would have to prosecute in person against the interest of a Goblin faction, and the letter of a reversion clause. If the child failed to answer the seal in the appointed season, the wardenship lapsed. And a lapsed wardenship over ownerless deep vaults was, to a mind trained as Prosper Vane's was trained, very nearly the definition of bona vacantia, a fortune fallen out of ownership, waiting for the crown's instrument to reach out a tidy hand and administer it. He did not smile because Prosper Vane spent expressions as rarely as goblins spent smiles, and for the same reason, which was that an expression is information and information is not to be given away. He drew a fresh sheet of ministry parchment toward him and squared it to the blotter, and he began, in a cramped, exact hand, to draft the first of the instruments by which a man who kept his edges square intended to be standing, when the tide came in, exactly where it came ashore. He wrote a note to seek the acquaintance of one Emeric Grieve, a broker of claims who was known in the narrow world of contested vaults to represent old families with long memories and longer grievances, and who might, Vane thought, know of a family that had once, before a certain concordat, believed the deep vaults belonged to them. 2 threads were better than 1, 2 threads could be woven, and a man who could weave 2 threads into a lawful noose had no need of anything so vulgar as a crime. None of which Harry knew, buttoning the blue coat that had been Dudley's in the hall of number 4 under the peg, while his aunt stood in the kitchen doorway with her back very straight and did not watch him go and did not quite not watch him either. The leaving of Privet Drive took less time than Harry had spent, on ordinary days, being told to weed the beds. Scarnock did not travel by any road the Dursleys owned. He took Harry out through the front door, past Vernon standing in the sitting room like a man who has been robbed of an argument he was owed, and at the gate the old goblin drew from his coat a short length of what looked like knotted grey cord, and told Harry to hold it, and to hold Griffook's hand with the other, and not to let go whatever the world did, and Harry, who had already decided that the surest way to learn a new rule was to obey the first instance of it exactly, held the cord and held the young goblin's hand, and the world folded. He would try, afterward, to describe it, and would fail, because there were no words at number 4 for the feeling of being drawn through the eye of a needle made of every direction at once. There was pressure and there was speed, and there was a smell of iron and cold stone rushing up to meet him out of nowhere, and then the folding stopped, and Harry stood, swaying on a floor of veined black marble, under a ceiling so high the light gave up before it reached the top, in a hall the size of a cathedral turned to the business of counting. He had known in the abstract that the world was larger than Privet Drive. He had not known it could be larger like this. The pillars went up into a dimness where lamps hung like planets that had agreed to stay indoors, and the marble under his shoes held, deep in its black, a slow-moving light that was not reflection, because there was nothing above it bright enough to reflect, a light that lived in the stone the way the twist of white lived frozen in his marble at home. The sound of 100 quills and the ring of coin and the low murmur of the deep language wrapped around him, all of it running on rails of a great patience, a hall where nothing was in a hurry because everything in it had already outlasted the hurry of whole nations. He looked up, and the lifting under his ribs went all the way to the top of the swing and hung there. Somewhere above, a chandelier the size of a cottage turned a quarter-inch on its chain and threw a single blade of gold light down across the floor, and Harry, without deciding to, put out his finger into it, as he had put it into the bar of sun on the path in Surrey, and the blade of light lay quiet across his fingernail and did not bend, because it was not his to bend here. Here it belonged to older keepers, and Harry understood that and drew his hand back, and something in the hall seemed to take note of the courtesy. Griffook, who had said nothing since Surrey and had been told to watch and learn, spoke then quietly at Harry's shoulder in the careful English of a goblin who used it seldom and therefore used it exactly. "You drew your hand back," the young teller said. "Most of your kind do not. Most of your kind reach for the light and are surprised when the hall does not love them for it. The keeper will not tell you that he saw you do it, because it is not a keeper's place to praise a claimant before the reckoning, and he is very correct, the keeper, in all his places. So I will tell you, because I am junior and my places are fewer. A wizard who knows that a light can belong to someone else is a rare wizard. Remember that you knew it before anyone taught you, and remember that a goblin noticed. It will matter to you one day when you are wondering whether any of us ever liked you or only owed you. Some of us noticed. That is not the same as owing." And he stepped back into his place a pace behind, having spent, Harry suspected, more words at once than he had spent in a year, and Harry kept the words in the place where he kept true things, and did not thank him aloud, because he had already learned that in the mountain a thing said plainly was best answered by being kept and not by being praised. "This is Gringotts," said Scarnock, releasing the cord, straightening his coat, watching the child watch the hall with the coin-colored patience of a being who remembered his own first sight of it 4 lifetimes ago. "The part the wizards see. It is the shallow end. You are going to the deep end, Harry Potter, where the wizards do not go, and you are going to answer a seal a king left bright for you, and I will be beside you the whole way down, because I have bound myself to answer for every word of the bond that brought you here, and a goblin who binds himself does not let go of the hand he has bound himself to keep." He set off across the veined marble, and the crowd of the hall parted, for the slate coat, without seeming to notice it, did so, and Harry, in Dudley's too big blue coat, with a bottle cap and a marble and a chess pawn in his pocket and a title older than his country waiting for him in the dark below, walked into the mountain and did not look back, because there was nothing behind him worth the turn, and everything he had ever wanted to know was ahead of him and going down. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The reading of the Concordat. They did not go to the deepest place that first day, because Scarnock held to the view that a thing shown too soon is a thing wasted, and that a child brought straight down the 1000th stair to the undermost tier would arrive at the vaults with nothing left in him to feel them with. So he took Harry down only as far as the reckoning hall of the second cavern, which was deep enough that the sounds of the counting-house above had thinned to nothing, and the walls had begun to breathe out the old cold, and there he stopped, and let the child stand in the arch a moment, and take the measure of the room before he had to be a claimant in it. The reckoning hall was round, and its floor was a single disk of grey stone worn shallow in the center by 3,000 years of goblins standing to be judged and to judge, and around its edge ran a low bench of the same stone where the directorate sat when the directorate sat, which was seldom, because a nation that meets often is a nation that has stopped trusting its own laws to run without it. At the center of the disk stood a reading stand of black iron, and on the reading stand, when Harry came in, lay the Concordat of the deep vaults, open, under a hood of clear crystal that Griffook lifted away as they approached, and set aside with the care of a person handling the one window in a house. Ragnock was already seated when they entered, alone on the stone bench, small and still and very old, and he watched Harry cross the worn floor toward him with eyes that gave nothing and missed nothing. Harry stopped the correct distance from the reading stand, which he judged by watching where Scarnock stopped and stopping half a pace behind, and he waited to be spoken to, because he had learned at number 4 that a room belonged to whoever it belonged to, and that the fastest way to be sent out of one was to behave like its owner when you were not. "You are smaller than the trouble you have caused," said Ragnock. It was not unkind. It was a reckoner's observation, weighing a claim against its cost. "Do you know where you are standing, Harry Potter?" "In a court," Harry said. "There's a bench for judges and a stand for the thing being judged, and the floor's worn in the middle where people stand to answer. So it's a court, and the thing being judged is on the stand, not me, which means today you're judging the paper and not the person who came with it." He considered, for now. There was a silence in the reckoning hall of a quality Harry had not heard before, the silence of a great many held opinions deciding all at once to be revised. Ragnock's gaze moved from Harry to Scarnock and held there a moment, and something passed between the two old goblins that Harry could not read, and then the high chieftain returned his attention to the child and inclined his head a careful degree. "For now," Ragnock agreed. "You read a room the way your forebear read a king." It is in the blood, it seems, or in the water you were raised on, and I begin to see why the keeper of the deep archive came back up the stair looking like a reckoner who had found a coin he did not expect in a pocket he had already emptied. Sit, not on the bench. The bench is for the directorate, and you are not that, whatever else you may become. There. He indicated a single stool of plain wood set at the edge of the worn disc, facing the reading stand. You will hear your bond read, all of it. You will stop the reading where you do not follow. A warden who does not understand his own concordat is a door that opens to any hand that learned the trick of it, and I did not keep these vaults for 374 years to hand them at the last to a door. Skarnok, read, and Skarnok read. He read from the beginning in the wizard's letters because the deep script was not Harry's to follow, and Skarnok did not believe in reading a bond to a person in a language he could not check, that being, in his experience, the commonest way honest-seeming clerks had cheated honest men across the whole history of ink. He read the recital first, the part that set out who was making the bond and why, and as he read he moved a thin rod of silver down the page so that Harry could see the very words the sounds were coming from, and Harry, on the plain stool at the edge of the worn stone, followed the silver rod and did not fidget, because there was nothing in the room he wanted more than to be exactly here, hearing this. Be it known and be it kept, Skarnok read, that in the 4th year of the reign of Urgok, king under the mountain, on the 12th day of the month, the wizards name October, in their year 1612, this concordat is made and sealed between the nation of the deep and the house of Potter of the surface, that a debt of faith may be answered in the only coin faith takes, which is faith. He paused and let the words sit, and then he said in his own voice and not the reading voice, "You have heard the story of the debt. Here it is in the ink that was wet when Urgok was alive. Do you follow?" "Yes," said Harry. "Keep going, I'll stop you." Skarnok kept going. He read clause the first, the debt itself, Hardwin's shelter and the girdle of Ragnuk and the refused gold, all of it set down in the flat exact language of a drafter who trusted facts and distrusted adjectives, and Harry listened and did not stop him because he already had the shape of it. He read clause the second, which named the thing given, and here Harry's hand came up. "Stop, read that part again, the part about what's given. There is granted to the house of Potter, and to the heir of that house in each generation, the wardenship of the 13 vaults of the undermost tier, being the vaults numbered in the deep figures 1 through 13, to hold in warden's trust, which is to say to keep and to stand for and to answer for, but not to own, not to alienate, not to empty, not to diminish, for the substance of those vaults is not the wardenship and does not pass with it." There. Harry pointed at the silver rod without touching the page. "It says 13 vaults, numbered 1 through 13, but it says the wardenship is one thing and the substance is another. So there's two questions, not one, who's the warden and what's actually in the vaults, and the bond only answers the first one. It never says what's inside." He looked up at Skarnok, then at Ragnuk on the bench. "Does anybody know what's inside, or is that a third question nobody's allowed to ask?" Ragnuk did not move, but the stillness around him changed the way still water changes when something large passes beneath it. "That," he said, "is a question that has cost lives, Harry Potter, and you have arrived at it in the second clause, which took me until the 6th. What is in the 13 vaults of the undermost tier is known to the nation and is not told to wizards, and the wardenship you are offered is precisely the office of the one wizard who is trusted to stand for what he is not told the whole of. You will learn some of it if you are invested, because a warden must know enough of what he keeps to keep it. You will not learn all of it, because no one alive knows all of it, and a person who tells you he does is selling you something." Skarnok, continue. "The child asks better questions than my counsel. Let us not waste him on the clauses he already understands." Skarnok read on. He read clause the third, the stewardship and the styling of the title, warden among goblins and lord among wizards, the two offices that rhymed and were not the same, and Harry nodded through it because he had it from the sitting room. He read clause the fourth and the fifth and the sixth, the ward conditions, the 6 seals of the deep that had each been set against a keeping the Potters were to render and had rendered, the doorway and the grain and the votes, and as he read he touched, one by one, the physical seals themselves where they hung from the foot of the document on their cords of gold wire, 6 discs of dark wax and metal, each struck with a different sigil, each sunk and spent. Harry left the stool then without asking and came to the reading stand and crouched to look at the seals at eye level, and no one told him to sit back down because the room had begun, without quite admitting it, to treat him as a person conducting an examination rather than a child being managed. "These 6 are the ones that already happened," he said. "The 8 candles minus 2, where are the other 2? "The first and the second are here," said Skarnok, and he lifted 2 further discs from where they hung slightly apart from the 6, set apart because they were the confirming seals, the sun's acceptance in the doorway, and they rank above the ward seals in the drafter's ordering. 8 in all spent and each darkened in its season, and here at the head of the document above them all are the 3 that are not condition seals at all but authenticating seals, which prove the concordat is what it says it is and was made by whom it says it was made by, and these you must learn to tell from the others, Harry Potter, because the whole of the trouble that is coming for you turns on the difference, and I would rather you learned it from me now than from an enemy later." Harry came round to the head of the document. 3 seals hung there, larger than the others, and Skarnock named them as he touched each in turn. The seal of Urgok, king under the mountain, struck in the black wax the kings used, bearing the mountain and the 9 stars which no goblin has counterfeited in living memory and lived. The mark of Bathrock Ironred, undermaster of the deep, who drafted this and worn it every word, struck smaller in the grey, bearing the drafter's quill and the balance. In this he rested one gloved finger beside the 3rd seal, and his voice changed, and Harry looked and saw that the 3rd seal was not wax at all but a disc of pale gold, and set into the gold, sealed under a skin of the same metal so that it lay beneath the surface like a thing under ice, was a single dark bead no larger than a peppercorn. The blood seal. A drop of Hardwin Potter's own blood, given freely at the sealing, sealed in gold by goblin craft so that it could not decay and could not be taken and could not be faked, for blood answers blood, and a bond sealed in a man's blood knows his line for as long as the line runs. It is by this seal, Harry Potter, and by no other, that the 9th condition will be answered. When you go down to the deep and answer the seal, it is to this drop of your forebear's blood that your own blood will be asked to answer, across 374 years, and if the 2 are of one line, the bond will know it, and if they are not, no writ and no title and no wanting in the world will make the gold believe a lie. Harry looked at the peppercorn of dark blood sealed under gold, the blood of a man 3 centuries dead who had refused a king's gold and asked for faith instead, and the lifting under his ribs came, and with it something quieter and heavier that settled under the lifting and stayed. He did not touch the seal. He looked at it for a while, and then he stood up, and he said the thing that was in him to say, because it seemed to him a room like this one deserved the truth spoken plainly. He gave his blood so that whoever came after him could be found. Harry looked at the gold and the dark bead under it, even if nobody knew their name, even if they were living in a cupboard and had never been told a true thing about where they came from. He made a way for them to be found anyway. He turned to Ragnarok. "That's the kindest thing anybody's ever done for me, and he did it before my grandfather's grandfather was born, and he never knew it was for me. I'd like to answer the seal." Not because of the vaults, because he left a light on. The reckoning hall was quiet. On the stone bench, Ragnarok the High Chieftain sat very still, and then he did a thing that Skarnock had seen him do perhaps 4 times in 119 years, which was to close his eyes for the space of one slow breath, as a goblin does when he has heard a true thing said in a place that is not used to them. When he opened them he said only, noted in the record, Griffhook. "The claimant has stated before witnesses that he seeks the wardenship for the keeping and not for the substance. It will matter later, write it in his own words," and Griffhook wrote, and the quill was the only sound in the hall. It was into that quiet that the wizards came. They came down the proper way and were announced at the arch because whatever the covetors intended, they intended it lawfully, and a challenge smuggled in by the back stair has no standing, and they knew it. Griffhook rose and read their names and their business from the runner's slate, and Harry, back on his stool by then, turned to watch 3 men enter the reckoning hall of the Goblin nation, and learned, in the space of their crossing the worn floor, a great deal about each of them from the manner of the crossing alone. First was very old and very tall and wore robes the deep blue of a winter dusk, and he crossed the floor slowly, pausing once to incline his head to Ragnarok with a courtesy that was neither servile nor false, and his eyes, behind half-moon spectacles, found Harry on the stool and rested there a moment with an expression that Harry could not fully read but that contained, he thought, more than one thing at once which interested him, because most adults' faces contained only whatever they were currently shouting. This was Albus Dumbledore, and Griffhook named him observer for the Wisengamot, present by right of the old liaison protocols in a matter touching a minor's estate, and Ragnarok acknowledged the naming and gave him a seat at the edge of the disc, apart, where an observer sits who is permitted to watch and not to speak unless asked. The second man was smaller and squarer and moved as though the floor were a document he was proofreading for errors, and he wore ministry gray, and he did not look at Harry at all, which Harry noticed, because a man who will not look at the person his business is about is a man who has already decided that person is a category and not a face. This was Prosper Vane, deputy head of the Office of Estate and Estates, and Griffhook named him as appearing for the Ministry of Magic in the matter of the disposition of magical property, and there was in the naming a coolness that told Harry the goblins knew exactly what an estate officer was, and exactly what an estate officer wanted, and did not love him for it, and would hear him anyway, because they were goblins and heard everyone once. The third man was the one Harry watched longest. He was neither old nor young, and he wore good robes cut a season out of fashion, which is the mark of a man who was once richer than he is, and he carried a slim case of black leather that he held in both hands the way a man holds a thing that is the whole of his position. He crossed the floor briskly and bowed to Ragnarok a degree too deep, which is the bow of a man selling the appearance of respect he does not feel, and Griffith named him Emeric Grieve, advocate of claims, appearing for the House of Selwyn in the matter of a prior lien upon the vaults of the undermost tier. And at that phrase, a prior lien upon the vaults of the undermost tier, the reckoning hall changed, and even Harry, 6 years old and 3 hours into the wizarding world, understood that the paper on the stand had just been challenged by another paper in a black leather case, and that the whole question of who he was about to become had just acquired an enemy with a document. Vane spoke first, because the ministry always speaks first, believing precedence to be a form of proof. He did not raise his voice. He laid out his position the way a man lays out cutlery, each piece square to the next. The ministry, he said, did not dispute that a concordat existed. The ministry disputed what could lawfully be done under it. There was, he observed, the matter of the claimant's age. Wizarding law did not permit a minor to hold a title of estate in his own right. Such a title, where it fell to a minor, was held in trust by his lawful guardian, or where the estate touched the public interest, administered by the ministry until the minor came of age. The wardenship of 13 vaults of enchanted substance of unknown and possibly hazardous character was, he submitted, an estate touching the public interest in the highest degree. He therefore gave the ministry's notice that whatever the Goblin nation determined as to the identity of the warden, the ministry would assert its right to administer the wardenship during the claimant's minority, which was to say for the next 12 years, and that any attempt to invest a child of 6 with independent standing over such an estate would be met with a writ from the Wisengamot's own bench. He said all of this without heat and without once looking at Harry, and when he had finished he squared his notes and sat, a man who had placed a heavy stone precisely where he meant it to fall. Ragnarok heard him out to the last word, and then said, in a voice like a door closing gently in a deep house, "The ministry's notice is heard and recorded. The ministry will understand that the wardenship of the deep vaults is not an estate under wizarding law but an office under goblin law, created by a bond that predates your Wisengamot's bench by a century, and that what the ministry may administer on the surface it does not administer beneath the 1000th stair, where its writ has never run and will not begin to run today. But your notice is heard. Sit, Master Grieve, you have brought a paper into my hall. Show it or take it back up the stair, and do not waste the nation's time with the rumor of a claim you are not prepared to lay on the stand beside the one already there." Emeric Grieve rose and opened the black leather case, and drew from it a single folded document sealed in green wax, and he crossed to the reading stand and laid it down beside the concordat with the air of a man laying a winning card, and he began to speak, and his voice was smooth and practiced, and had in it the particular warmth that dishonest men keep for the moments they most need to be believed. The House of Selwyn, he said, was one of the oldest houses of magical Britain, and its records ran back past the statute, past the concordat, past the reign of Urgok himself. And among those records was a deed which he now laid before the nation, dated the year 1547, 65 years before the concordat of the deep vaults, by which the Goblin nation of that earlier day had pledged the vaults of the undermost tier to the House of Selwyn as security against a great loan of gold, and had never redeemed the pledge, the loan having never been repaid. So that the lien of Selwyn upon those vaults had lain dormant, but never extinguished for 439 years. If that were so, Grieve said, and he invited the nation to examine the deed and satisfy itself that it was so, then the King Urgok in 1612 had pledged to the Potters in Warden's Trust vaults that were already encumbered by an older and superior claim, and a man cannot give in trust what he has already given in security, and therefore the Potter wardenship, whatever its sentimental history, had always been subordinate to the Selwyn lien. And if the wardenship should lapse, or indeed whether or not it lapsed, the vaults themselves were answerable first to Selwyn. He bowed again, the degree too deep, and returned to his seat, and the black leather case sat empty on his knees like a thing that had delivered its egg. Harry had come off the stool again during Grieve's speech quietly and had crossed to the reading stand, and no one had stopped him, and he stood now looking down at the green-sealed deed lying beside the concordat, at the two documents side by side, the one 374 years old and the other claiming to be 439, and he was doing the thing he did, which was to look for the rule underneath. He did not touch either paper. He looked at the seals. He looked at the ink. He looked at the way the older claiming document lay flatter and cleaner against the black iron than a document 65 years its senior had any business lying. And something in the back of his 6-year-old mind, some part of him that had spent a lifetime noticing which stories had details and which were painted doors, went very quiet and very attentive, the way it had gone quiet over the plant that grew toward a sun it could not see. "Master Reckoner," Harry said, not loudly, but the hall was quiet and it carried, "you said the blood seal can't be faked because it's goblin craft, and the king's seal can't be faked because nobody's done it and lived, so goblin seals are hard to fake." He looked up at Skarnok. This deed says the goblins made it in 1547, so it should have a goblin seal on it that's hard to fake, does it? Skarnock came to the stand. He drew on a fresh gray glove. He turned the green-sealed deed without opening it, so that its authenticating mark caught the lamp, and he looked at it for a long moment. And Harry watched the old goblin's face do the thing his own had done, go quiet and attentive, and then Skarnock looked up, and across the reading stand over the two documents, the keeper of the deep archive and the 6-year-old claimant looked at each other with the particular understanding of two people who have both, independently, seen the same crack in the same wall. "It has a goblin seal," Skarnock said slowly, choosing each word the way a man chooses footholds over a drop. "It has a mint mark of the nation, struck in the manner of an authentication. And I will say now before the witnesses that I make no accusation today, because an accusation without a finding is itself a kind of forgery, and I am a reckoner and not a slanderer. But I will say that the mark upon this deed is a mark I know, and that I intend to examine it very closely with the registers of the mint beside it, before this nation accepts that it was struck in 1547, because a seal is a date that cannot lie. And if a seal has been made to tell a lie about its date, then everything sealed beneath it is a lie also, and the house of Selwyn has laid upon my stand either the oldest claim in this hall or the newest, and there is, in the deep, no crime worse than the second dressed as the first." Emeric Greaves' practiced warmth did not falter because he was good, but his hands closed a fraction on the empty leather case, and Harry saw it, and Prosper Vane saw that Harry saw it, and turned his squared attention on the child for the first time since he had entered, and looked at him with the cold considering look of a man who has just realized that the piece he had counted as a pawn moves, after all, like something else. Ragnock let the silence hold for exactly as long as it was useful, and then he brought the flat of his hand down once upon the stone bench, not hard, but the sound went round the round hall and came back, and the reckoning hall came to order under it. "Then this is the finding of the day," he said, "and Griffock will record it whole. The concordat of the deep vaults is woken and is genuine and stands. Against it are laid two challenges. The ministry asserts a right to administer the wardenship during the claimant's minority. That assertion is heard and is denied as to the deep, for the deep is not the ministry's to administer, and is reserved as to the surface, where it may be argued in the surface's own courts and will trouble us no further here. The house of Selwyn asserts a prior leyen by a deed of 1547. That assertion is heard and is neither accepted nor denied, but is referred to the keeper of the deep archive for examination of its seal against the registers of the mint, and until that examination is complete, the deed has the standing of a question and not of a fact, and Master Grieve will leave it in the nation's keeping under crystal, for a claim laid on the stand is not carried back up the stair in a leather case at its owner's convenience." Grieve began to object and thought better of it, because a man who fights to take back the document he has just sworn is genuine tells the room he fears its examination, and Grieve was too clever for that, and so he bowed the degree too deep and let the green-sealed deed be hooded under crystal beside the concordat, and Harry watched it go under the glass and thought that it looked under crystal exactly like what it was, a question pretending to be an answer. "And the reckoning," Ragnock said. "The bond requires that the ninth seal be answered before the deep tide turns thrice from its waking, and one tide has turned already while the directorate deliberated, and a second is on the ebb. The claimant will be brought down to the undermost tier to make himself known to the vaults, as is his right and his preparation, and on the day the third tide turns he will stand in the deep and answer the ninth seal, and on that day every claim laid against him will stand or fall in the same hour, because the bond does not adjourn and the tide does not wait, and I will not have this nation's oldest keeping decided by whichever party can afford the most delay. The reckoning is set. Master Reckoner, the child is in your charge. Teach him his own concordat as though his life turned on it, for it may, and teach him quickly, for we are one tide from the end." He rose, and the audience was over, and the wizards were shown up the stair, and Emeric Grieve went up it a shade faster than a man leaves a victory, and Prosper Vane went up it slowly, looking back once at the small figure by the reading stand, and Albus Dumbledore went up it last of all and paused at the arch and looked back at Harry across the worn stone floor and did not speak, because an observer may not, but inclined his head to the child the exact degree that one gives to a person one has decided to take seriously, and then he too was gone up into the light, and the reckoning hall held only goblins and a boy and two documents under crystal, one of which was true and one of which, Harry was now nearly certain, was a very old lie wearing a date it had not earned. Skarnock hooded the concordat again with his own hands. He stood a moment over the two crystal documents, and then he looked at Harry across them, and there was in the coin-colored eyes a thing that had not been there when they climbed the stair in Surrey, a thing that Harry would only later have the word for, which was respect, given whole and without discount from an old and careful being to a young and careful one. "You saw it," Skarnock said, "the deed lying too flat, the seal you did not like." You saw it before I named it, and you named the right question, which is not is it a lie, but does its seal tell the truth about its age? And that is the only question that can catch a good forgery, because a good forgery is true in everything except the one thing its maker could not make old. We have a tide, Harry Potter. One tide to learn your concord at and to take that deed apart and to bring you down to a place no wizard your age has ever stood, and answer a seal a dead king left bright for you, against 3 men who would each, for reasons of their own, rather you did not. He lifted the lamp from its hook, and its light was the color of a coin held to a candle, and it fell on the 2 documents under their crystal and on the child's serious face across from him. Come. The mint registers are 4 caverns down, and we begin tonight because your enemies are not sleeping, and a warden who sleeps while his enemies read is a warden already half robbed. You asked to answer the seal because your forebear left a light on. Good. Now we find out whether you can keep one lit yourself in the dark against the wind, which is, when all the clauses are read and all the seals are counted, the whole of what a warden is. The mint registers were kept 4 caverns down, in a long low vault where the air smelled of cold brass and older dust, and along its walls, from the floor to a height no goblin could reach without the rolling ladders that stood at intervals, ran the bound registers of every mark the nation's mint had struck since the mint was cut into the rock. Mark by mark, reign by reign, each register a heavy book of rubbings and dies, each stamped on its spine with the years it covered. Skarnock carried the Selwyn deed down under crystal, and a witness came with them to keep the record honest, because a reckoner does not examine a challenged document alone lest he be later accused of altering what he claims to have found, and Harry, who had been given a stool and told he might watch as long as he asked before he touched anything, sat at the end of the reading bench with his chin on his folded arms and watched the old goblin work, and learned more in an hour of watching than a year at number 4 had taught him about anything. They had been an hour at it, and Skarnock had pulled down the register that covered the 1540s and set it open beside the crystal deed, when a 4th person came into the mint cavern without being announced, because he outranked the requirement, and stood at the foot of the ladders in a coat cut close and dark, and looked at the 2 of them over the open books with an expression that gave away exactly as much as he intended, which was a measured, courteous, freezing amount. The under-reckoner, Skarnock said, without looking up from the register. You are far from your desk, Nargpast. The directorate is entitled to know how its keeper spends the nation's tide, said Nargpast, and his voice was smooth and cold and precise, a voice that had never once been raised because it had never once needed to be. A challenged deed is examined, good. The nation's honor requires it be examined truly, and truly means by more eyes than the ones that have already, I am told, decided the wizard child is a marvel. He came a few steps nearer, and his gaze moved to Harry on the stool and rested there, and there was in it no cruelty, which Harry noticed, and no warmth, which he noticed also, only a weighing, the cold accounting of a being deciding what a thing was worth and whether the price was just. You are the claimant. You sat on Ragnar's floor today and told my chieftain you want the wardenship for the keeping and not the gold, and he closed his eyes, and my nation began to fall in love with you, which is a thing my nation does perhaps once in a century and regrets rather more often than that. You don't want me to have it, Harry said. It was not a question, and he did not say it as a challenge. He said it plainly, the same as he had told Skarnock what a bond was, laying the true thing on the table to see what the room would do with it. Nargpast regarded him. No, he said, and Harry respected the no, because it was the first fully honest word an adult had given him in that hall. I do not because you are a bad child, you appear to be a dangerously good one. I do not want it because the 13 vaults of the undermost tier are the deepest keeping of my nation, and for 374 years my nation has swept and warded and answered for them, and asked no wizard's leave to do it, and now a bond 3 centuries cold reaches up and says that a wizard of 6 must be styled their lord, and every goblin from here to the sea will bow the neck to a human child over the substance of our own mountain, and call it honor. I say it is honor bought too dear. I say a king in an old debt overpaid, and I say the nation should not be made to pay his overpayment forever because he could not bear to owe a favor. That is what I want, claimant. I want the deep kept by the deep. It is not a monstrous want. Your master reckoner would tell you, if you were honest, that it is very nearly the want of every goblin who ever lived, and that the only thing standing between it and you is a drop of blood under gold and the fact that we do not break our word. That's a good reason to be against me, Harry said after a moment, and he meant it. It's a better reason than the wizards had. They want the gold. You want your own mountain kept by your own people. I understand that. He looked at the open register and at the crystal deed and then back at Nargpast, and the thing he said next he said carefully, because he had worked out over the hour of watching exactly how much of it he could see and exactly how much he could not. But you brought up honor twice, and you said the nation doesn't break its word, so you're not going to help the wizards, are you? Even though the wizards want the same thing you want, which is for me to fail, because they'd take the vaults and you'd keep them. You want the same door shut, but for opposite reasons, and that means you can't work together, or the moment I'm gone you be fighting each other over what's behind it." The mint cavern was quiet. Skarnok had stopped turning pages. Nargpast looked at the child on the stool for a long moment, and something moved behind the cold accounting of his face, some recalculation, and when he spoke again his courtesy had a new edge under it, sharper and more careful, the courtesy of an opponent who has revised upward the danger of the game. "No," he said, "I will not work with the wizards. I will keep my word, and I will oppose you inside the law and the bond and not a hair outside them, and that claimant should frighten you more than an alliance would, not less. A dishonest enemy can be caught being dishonest. I intend to beat you honestly by the letter of the very bond you are counting on, if the letter can be made to serve the nation's keeping, and if it cannot, I will bow to your investiture as low as any goblin in the mountain and mean the bow, and hate the necessity, and be exactly as loyal to you afterward as my oath requires and not 1 degree warmer. That is what I am. I tell you plainly because you told me plainly, and because a claimant who does not know the shape of his lawful opposition is a claimant already beaten by it." He inclined his head the precise degree to Skarnok and turned to go, and then paused at the foot of the ladders. "Examine the seal truly, keeper. If the Selwyn deed is a forgery, I want it found, because a forged claim in this hall shames the nation as much as a broken bond would, and I will not have the deep kept by a lie any more than I will have it kept by a wizard. We are in that one narrow thing on the same side. Do not mistake it for more than it is." And he went, and the cold of him went with him, and the mint cavern seemed 1 degree warmer for his leaving, though the brass smell of it did not change. Harry sat with his chin on his arms and watched the empty arch where the under-reckoner had gone. "He's the most honest one in the whole story," he said, half to himself. "He is," Skarnok agreed, turning back to the register. "And the most dangerous for exactly that reason, because you cannot catch him in a lie he will not tell, and you cannot buy him with a gold he does not want, and you cannot shame him with an honor he already keeps better than you do. If you are to beat Nargpest, Harry Potter, you will have to do it by being right, wholly right, in the open on the letter where he lives. Which is why we are down here at this hour, and why I am glad, on the whole, that you are the kind of child who noticed the deed lay too flat." He drew the rolling ladder along its rail until it stood beneath the higher shelves, and set his gloved hand on it, and looked back at Harry with the coin-colored patience of a being who has decided, against a lifetime of caution, to teach everything he knows to someone in a great hurry. "Now, the registers are ordered by reign, not by year, because the mint changed its master die whenever the king changed, and a seal carries the die of the king who reigned when it was struck. So the seal on that deed is not only a date, it is a claim about which kings sat under the mountain in 1547, and kings, unlike dates, leave a great deal of evidence lying about. Fetch me the roll of the succession, Harry. It is the thin red book by your elbow. We are going to find out which king the Selwyn seal says was reigning, and then we are going to find out which king actually was, and if those two kings are not the same king, then Emeric Grieve has laid upon my stand a lie so old and so bold that it named the wrong monarch, and we will hang his whole house on the neck of a dead goblin who is not yet crowned." Harry fetched the thin red book. Somewhere far above them the second tide was turning on the ebb, and one remained, and in the cold brass light of the mint cavern, a very old goblin and a very young wizard bent their two careful heads over the succession of kings, hunting the single crack that a good forgery always leaves, and a great one leaves only once. Harry ran his finger down the column of reigns, mouthing the strange names of dead kings, and stopped at the year, and set his finger on it and looked up at Skarnok, and did not yet say what he had found because he wanted to be sure, and being sure was the one luxury a warden was allowed before he spoke. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The deep vaults. The cart that carried the ordinary customers to the ordinary vaults did not go where Skarnok took Harry the next day. It ran a little way and then it stopped at a landing hung with lamps, and beyond the landing the rails ended in a low arch, and beyond the arch there was no cart and no rail and no railing, only a stair cut straight down out of the living rock, turning on itself in a spiral so wide that the far side of it was lost to the lamp, going down into a dark that did not have the feel of a dark with a bottom. "The 1000th stair," said Skarnok, and he lifted his lamp, and the light of it went a little way down the steps and was swallowed. "Below this the wizards do not come, saving the goblin cart when it must, and below the 9th landing not even the cart. We walk from here. Keep to the wall side. Do not lean out over the drop to look for the bottom. There is a bottom, but it is not for looking at, and the deep does not love a person who leans over its edge on the first acquaintance." He started down, and Griffook came behind Harry with a second lamp, and Harry went between the two goblins down into the mountain, one hand trailing the cold stone of the wall, and the world of the surface closed over the top of the stair like water over a diver, and was gone. He counted the steps for a while, because counting was what he did with a thing too large to hold, and he lost the count somewhere past 400, not because he tired of it, but because the counting stopped seeming like the point. The character of the stair changed as they went down. Near the top the rock had been dressed and squared by chisels, and he could see the marks of them, the honest scars of goblins who had cut this passage by hand in an age before his country had a name. Deeper the chisel marks thinned, and then they stopped, and the walls of the stair were no longer cut but grown, smooth and folded like the inside of a shell, veined with metals that had never been mined because no one had ever needed to mine what they could simply walk between. Gold and a green ore Harry had no name for, and long threads of silver that caught the lamp and passed it hand to hand down the wall ahead of them, so that the light seemed to run on before, lighting their way a heartbeat before they came to it. And the deeper they went, the more the dark stopped being an absence and started being a presence. It was not empty, that dark. It was full, the way the inside of a bell is full a moment after it is struck, of a low, unhearable note that Harry felt in the roots of his teeth and the soles of his feet more than in his ears. A vast, patient hum that was the sound. Skarnock told him quietly when he asked, of the old magic lying in the deep places of the earth, magic that had been here before the goblins cut the first stair and would be here after the last vault was empty. Magic that the nation did not make and did not own but had learned across 10,000 years to build beside without waking, the way a village learns to live beside a sleeping and enormous animal by never, ever running. "Is it alive?" Harry asked. His voice came out small in the huge dark, and he did not mind that it did, because a person who is not made small by a thing this size has not understood the thing. "I do not know," Skarnock said, and Harry believed him because it was a strange answer for a master reckoner to give, and he gave it plainly. "It is a question the deep does not answer and the wise stop asking. It is old, it keeps to itself. It notices, I think, though it notices slowly, the way a mountain notices the seasons. And it is bound up in the vaults, Harry Potter, in a manner the surface would not believe, because the 13 vaults of the undermost tier are not boxes we built to hold treasure. They are places where the deep was already strong, and my forefathers came down and found them strong and set doors upon them and made a keeping of what the earth was already keeping. That is why they cannot be moved and cannot be copied and cannot be truly robbed, though men have died believing otherwise. You do not own a place like that. At the most, at the very most, if you are honest and the deep consents, you are allowed to stand at its door and be counted among the things it keeps. That is the whole of what your forebear was given. Now you begin to see, I think, why a goblin might spend 300 years thinking it too great a gift for a wizard, and why another goblin might spend 300 years thinking no gift could be too great for the wizard who earned it. The deep is where our two nations keep the argument that made us kin. They came at the 9th landing upon the dragon. Harry smelled it before he saw it, a smell of hot metal and old smoke and something underneath both that was older than either, and then the stair opened out into a cavern so vast that the lamps could not find its roof, and across the floor of the cavern, coiled upon a heap of its own molten leavings, lay a dragon. It was pale, the color of a thing that has not seen the sun in a life measured in centuries, its scales gone the translucent gray-white of a blind cavefish, and it was old, so old that Harry understood at once that it had stopped being merely an animal a long time ago, and had become something more like a feature of the deep, a living ward grown into its post. It did not sleep, exactly. One eye, a great pale disk filmed and clouded, tracked them along the wall, and a sound came out of the vast pale bulk of it that was too low to be a growl and too deep to be anything else, a sound Harry felt come up through the soles of his shoes. It is nearly blind and wholly deaf, and it has guarded the descent to the undermost tier for 400 years, Skarnock said, and he did not lower his voice because the dragon could not hear it, and he did not hurry, because to hurry past a ward is to tell it you are afraid, and a ward that learns you are afraid begins to wonder why. It knows us by a sound the nation makes that you will learn if you are invested, and it knows the wardens by their blood, which is the second reason we do not fake a warden, Harry Potter. For a false warden reaches the 9th landing and the dragon knows the blood is wrong, and then there is no need of a court, because the matter has been settled by an older law than the Concordat. He drew from his coat a small instrument that made no sound Harry could hear, but that turned the great pale eye toward them, and then slowly away, and the low tremendous note sank back down into the dragon's bulk, and it let them pass, and Harry walked the length of a sleeping ward the size of a chapel with his hand on the cold wall and his eyes very wide, and did not run because Skarnock had told him not to, and because some steadier thing under his wonder had already understood that this, too, was a keeping, and that he was walking through the middle of what he had come down to learn to hold. "It's guarding, not imprisoning," Harry said when they were past, and the dragon's low note had sunk back into the dark behind them. "The gold's already down here. It's not chained to a hoard to stop it leaving. It's between the world and the vaults, facing outward. It's a wall, not a prisoner. That's different." He looked back once at the vast pale shape settling on the heap of its own leavings. "Everybody up on the surface thinks the dragon is chained to guard the goblin's treasure. But it can't leave because it doesn't want to. It's not a slave. It's a warder like you, like I'm going to be. It stands in the cold doorway because the doorway matters." Skarnock did not answer at once, and when he did there was in his dry voice the particular note Harry had begun to be able to read, the note of an old being who has just been told something true about his own home by a stranger of 6. "The surface has written a great deal about that dragon," he said, "and almost none of it is correct, and I have never troubled to correct it, because a lie that keeps thieves frightened is a cheaper reward than a truth that makes them brave. But you have looked at the same beast the surface looks at and seen a warder where they see a prisoner, which is the difference, Harry Potter, between a person who will understand the wardenship and a person who will only ever covet it. Keep looking at things that way. It is the rarest thing you have brought down the stair, rarer than your blood, and it cannot be forged and it cannot be bought, and it is the reason I have stopped, somewhere between the 9th landing and this one, thinking of you as a duty and started thinking of you as a warden." Beyond the dragon the stair went down only a little further and ended, and they stood upon the floor of the undermost tier. It was a gallery. That was the nearest word Harry had, though it was to a gallery as the deep dark was to a shadow. A single vast passage ran away into the dark before them, and it was lined on both sides, at intervals of 40 paces, with doors, and the doors were not the doors of the upper vaults, which were iron and studded and honest. These were single slabs of a dark stone that was almost black and was not quite, that held down in its depth the same slow-moving light that had lived in the marble of the great hall far above, so that each door glowed very faintly from within itself, a deep and secret glow the color of the inside of a closed eye, and above each door was cut a single figure in the deep script, and Scarnock named them as they passed, the figures of the deep count 1, 2, 3. And Harry understood that he was walking down the row of the 13 deep vaults, and that behind each glowing black door lay a place where the earth was strong, and had been kept strong for longer than his kind had known there was a nation under the mountain at all. He did not ask what was behind them. He found he did not want to, yet, the wanting having been replaced by something larger and quieter that had no name in the vocabulary of number 4. He walked and he looked, and the low, unhearable note of the deep ran under everything, and the doors glowed their closed-eye glow, and 40 paces became 80, became 120, and then at the door marked with the single first figure of the deep count, Vault I, the door at the head of the gallery, the door of the warden's vault, Scarnock stopped and set his lamp in a bracket cut for it and turned to Harry and said, "Here, this is the seat of the wardenship. This door does not open to gold or to a key or to a goblin, not even to me. It opens to the warden and to no one else, and it has not opened in 374 years, because for 374 years there has been no living warden to open it, only a bright seal waiting and a line of forebears keeping faith on the surface. You may not open it today, you are not yet invested. But you may put your hand upon it if you choose, because you are of the blood, and the blood is why the door is here, and I think the deep should be given the chance to know that its warden has come at last, before we ask it at the reckoning to say so." Harry looked at the black glowing door, at the first figure of the deep count cut above it, at the slow secret light moving in the stone. He was 6 years old. He had a bottle cap and a marble and a chess pawn in the pocket of a coat that had been Dudley's. He had never in his life been given a thing that was his and had it stay given. He lifted his hand, and he did not hurry, because the deep did not love a person who hurried, and he laid his palm flat upon the door of the warden's vault. The door was cold, and then it was not. It warmed under his hand from the center outward, a warmth with no source, the warmth of a thing waking that has slept a long time and is glad, in whatever way stone is glad, to be woken by the right hand at last. The slow light in the black stone gathered toward his palm the way the bar of sun had gathered to his finger on the path in Surrey, but it did not stop at a coin of brightness. It kept coming, a tide of that deep interior glow rising up through the stone to meet his hand, and where his hand lay a shape bloomed in the door, faint and enormous, the 9-seal ring, 8 dark and 1 bright, the same figure that was struck on the token and stamped on the clasp of the concordat, rising up out of the black stone of the door as though the door had always had it written in its heart and had only been waiting for the right warmth to read it out. And under his palm, through the warming stone, Harry felt the deep take note of him. It was not a voice. It was slower and vaster than a voice, the attention of something the size of the mountain turning, by a single degree, toward a small hand at a door it had kept shut for the length of 11 human lives, and finding in the blood of that hand the answer to a question it had held unasked, since a king it remembered had sealed a bond it had witnessed. The bright 9th mark on the door flared once, gently, a pulse of gold light that ran away up the gallery from door to door, 1, 2, 3, all the way down the row of the 13, so that for the space of a breath every vault of the undermost tier glowed a little brighter, as a household stirs when word runs through it that the one long awaited has come to the gate. Then the light sank back and the door cooled and the ring faded down into the black stone, and Harry took his hand away and stood in the enormous quiet with his palm still warm, and understood that he had been for a moment recognized. "It knows me," he said. His voice did not shake, but it was very quiet. "It knows your blood," Scarnock said, and there was in the coin-colored eyes a thing Harry had not seen in them before, an old grave gladness held carefully in check. "It does not yet know you, for the deep distinguishes between the two, and so should you. Your blood it has answered, because your blood is Hardwin's blood, and Hardwin it remembers. At the reckoning you will answer the ninth seal not with your blood alone but with a word of your own choosing, and it is by the word that the deep will come to know you, the person and not merely the line, and decide whether the keeping it has held for 3 centuries is safe in your particular hands and not only in your family's. Blood opens the door of the court, the word opens the door of the vault. Remember the difference. Your enemies do not have your blood and cannot get it. But a word can be stolen or coached or bought, and there are those who will try in the tide that remains to put their word in your mouth in place of your own, and if they succeed the deep will hear a coached word and know it for what it is, and the seal will not answer, and the reversion will fall, and everything Hardwind bought will be lost by a warden who let another man choose his word for him. Choose it yourself, tell no one what it is, not Ragnarok, not me. It is the one thing in this whole business that is yours alone, and it is not by accident the thing the deep cares most about. Harry nodded. He was already, somewhere under the wonder, turning the problem of the word over, hunting as he hunted every problem for the rule underneath, and he understood without being told that this was a problem he would carry alone down to the reckoning, and that carrying it alone was the point. You have felt what a warden's vault is, Skarnok said, which is a door that will open only to you and that you may not yet open. That is a poor introduction to a keeping, being all promise and no substance, and I will not send you up the stair with nothing in your hands but a locked door and a warning. A warden must know some of what he keeps, and there is one vault of the 13 that a keeper may open in a warden's presence, for it is the vault that explains all the others, and I have decided you shall see it, because a person defends most fiercely the thing he has been permitted to love, and you will need in the tide to come to love this enough to fight for it. Come, Vault 7, walk softly. What is inside does not sleep exactly, and it is a discourtesy to startle it. They went back a little way up the gallery, to the 7th of the glowing black doors, and Skarnok set both gloved hands flat upon it and spoke to it in the deep language. A long, low phrase that was more like a note held than a sentence said, and the door of Vault 7 did not swing because it had no hinge but thinned, the black stone of it going from stone to smoke to a doorway of cool, moving air, and beyond it lay a hall, and Harry stepped through at Skarnok's side into the 7th of the deep vaults, and forgot for a while that he had a body to stand in. The hall was full of light, and the light had no lamp. It came from the things themselves. For the whole vast length of the vault, on stands and in niches, and hanging from the unseen roof on chains of a metal that sang faintly when the air moved them, lay the makings of the Goblin nation across 10,000 years. Crowns and cups and coats of a mail so fine it poured like water, blades that held a line of blue fire sleeping along their edges, torques and rings and instruments whose purpose Harry could not guess and did not need to, masks of beaten gold with the faces of goblins so long dead that the faces had become the faces of a people rather than of any one of them, in every single object. Harry understood as he walked the aisle of them with his mouth open and his wonder gone all the way to the top of the swing, and staying there, was giving off, very softly, a sound, not a sound for the ears. A sound for the teeth and the breastbone, the same deep unhearable note as the mountain itself, but split now into 10,000 separate voices, each object singing its own thread of the one great chord, so that the vault was not silent at all but was the most full of sound of any place Harry had ever stood, a cathedral of held notes, and the light that came off the singing metal moved on the black walls in slow tides of gold and green, and a red like the last of a coal. The unransomed makings, said Skarnok, and even his dry voice had gone quiet in the singing hall. Goblin hands made every object you see, and goblin law says a goblin-made thing is only ever lent to the wizard who buys it, and returns to the nation when that wizard dies, for the making is the maker's and cannot truly be sold, only borrowed for a life. Your kind and mine have gone to war over that law more than once, Harry Potter, and will again, and I will not pretend to you that the law is simple, or that my nation has always been in the right of how it kept it. But here is where the makings come home in the end, the ones we have gathered back across the centuries, and here they are kept, not as gold is kept to be counted, but as a people keeps the works of its own hands, which is to say as memory, as proof to ourselves across time that we were here and that we made beauty and that the beauty was ours. This is not a treasury. It is the nation's heart, laid down in metal, in the deepest place we have, behind the oldest door under the blindest dragon. And it is one of the 13 things a potter has stood at the door of for 300 years and never once tried to carry off, though a single blade from this hall would buy your ministry twice over. Do you see now what the wardenship is? Do you see what it is to be trusted with the door of a nation's heart, and to be trusted precisely because your blood once refused the gold and asked for faith? Harry could not speak for a moment. He walked to the end of the singing aisle where the light was oldest and reddest, and there on a stand apart from all the rest, in a niche cut with more care than any other in the hall, lay a girdle of worked gold, a belt of linked plates each no bigger than a thumbnail, each graven with a figure of the deep script, and it sang lower and older than anything near it, and above its niche was cut, in the deep letters that Harry was beginning to learn, a name he could read, Ragnarok. And beside the girdle, set into the stone of the niche, was a single plate of silver, and on the silver, in the wizard's letters and the deep script both, so that no one of either nation could fail to read it, were graven the words Harry had first heard in a cold sitting room in Surrey: "Gold pays for goods. It does not pay for kindness. Keep your gold and keep faith with me, and we are square." And beneath the words a smaller line: "Here the girdle of Ragnarok came home, borne down by the hand of Hardwin Potter, who asked nothing. Let the nation not forget it while metal sings." Harry stood before the girdle of Ragnarok, the thing his forebear had ridden after raiders to take back and had carried down to the gates of the mountain and given away for no reward, and he looked at the words graven in silver, the same words that had made a king unable to sleep for the weight of an unpaid kindness, and the emotion he had been keeping carefully folded since the door of the warden's vault came unfolded all at once, and its name was grief, though it was a strange grief. A grief with gladness inside it, like the twist of white inside his marble. Grief for a man 3 centuries dead whom he would never meet, and who had, without knowing it, left a door open in the deepest place in the world so that a child in a cupboard could one day be found. He did not cry. He was not, in the ordinary way, a crier. The cupboard had taught him that tears were currency that bought nothing at number 4 and were better saved. But he stood a long moment before the singing girdle and the silver words, and Skarnok stood a pace behind him and let him stand, because a keeper knows that there are things a person must be permitted to feel at the correct altar, and this was one, and the reckoning could spare the moment. He didn't do it for the vaults, Harry said at last, without turning. He didn't even know about the vaults. He gave it back because giving it back was right, and the vaults came after because the king couldn't stand owing a right thing. So the whole wardenship, all 13 doors, all of this, and he lifted his hand a little toward the singing hall and did not point, all of it exists because one man did one right thing and refused to be paid for it. And now 3 men want to take it from me, and one of them made a forgery, and one of them wants to break the altar, and they think it's about gold. He turned then and looked up at Skarnok, and his face had in it something older than 6. It was never about gold, it's about whether a right thing done a long time ago still counts. That's what the reckoning is really deciding, isn't it? Not whether I'm the warden, whether kindness is still a bond, or whether it's gone back to being just a wish that anybody can wave away if the waving's worth enough. Skarnok looked at the child standing in the light of the nation's heart and was quiet, and then he said, "Ragnarok asked me, the night the seal woke, whether the debt was just. I told him it was. I did not tell him the half of why, because I did not, until this moment, have the whole of it. You have just given me the whole of it, Harry Potter, in the 7th vault at 6 years old, and I am going to carry your words up the stair to my chieftain as I carried Hardwin's words down it 300 years ago in the record, because they belong together, and because a nation about to be asked to fight for a bond should be reminded, in the claimant's own voice, exactly what it is fighting for. Come away now. The girdle has sung for you, and that is enough. It is a discourtesy to stay past the welcome. We have seen what you keep, now I must show you the place where they mean to break it." He spoke again to the doorway, and the cool moving air thickened back to smoke and then to black stone, and the singing hall was sealed behind them, and the gallery of the undermost tier was quiet again, but for the one low note under everything, and Harry walked away from the 7th door with the memory of 10,000 voices in his breastbone and the silver words behind his eyes. They went on down the gallery, because Skarnok wished to show him the seal chamber where the reckoning would be held, so that when he came to it in earnest on the day the third tide turned, he would not be meeting the room and the ordeal at the same time. The seal chamber lay at the far end of the row of the 13, past the 13th door, in a round chamber cut where the gallery ended, and at its center stood a low altar of the black stone, and set into the altar, under a dome of the clear crystal, was the answering point of the concordat. A shallow basin of gold, and above the basin, held in an armature of goblin silver, the blood seal itself, the disk of pale gold with the peppercorn of Hardwin's blood sealed beneath its skin, carried down from the document to its seat for the reckoning, so that at the appointed hour the living blood might answer the sealed blood across the gap of 374 years. It was the most sacred object Harry had ever stood near, and he knew it, and he stopped the correct distance from it without being told, and looked at the peppercorn of ancient blood under gold, and thought about a man who had made a way to be found. And then he saw the thing that was wrong. He saw it because he was 6 years old and small, and standing at the height at which small people stand, which is the height of the foot of the altar and not the height of its top, where the goblin's eyes went. And he saw it because he had spent his whole life reading the difference between a story with details and a painted door. And he saw it because a person who has been looking for the rule underneath every day since he was 3 does not stop looking merely because a room is holy. On the floor of the seal chamber, at the foot of the altar, in the fine pale dust that Skarnok had told him the deep did not gather, there was a mark. It was faint. It was the mark of the edge of something set down and taken up again, a shallow curved scuff in dust that should not have been there at all, because the deep did not gather dust, which meant the dust was not dust but something carried in, and a thing carried into a place where nothing is carried is a thing that came on a person, and a person had stood here at the foot of the answering altar and set something down and picked it up and gone. Master Reckoner, Harry said, and he did not point, because he had learned that a claim made by pointing is a claim a clever man can wave away, and instead he crouched, and he put his own finger in the pale scuff without disturbing it, and he looked up. The deep doesn't gather dust, you told me that twice, so where did this come from? Somebody's been standing here, right here at the altar, close enough to touch the blood seal. And not long ago, because the deep would have taken the dust back if it had been long, and it hasn't. The seal chamber was very still. Skarnock came and crouched, which a goblin of his age did not do lightly, and looked at the scuff of pale dust at the foot of the altar of his nation, and his face, which Harry had seen do dryness and reappraisal and a careful gladness, did now a thing worse than anything the dragon had done, because the dragon was only enormous, and this was the stillness of a being who has kept a thing safe for 119 years and has just been shown by a child that in some tide he did not mark. The safe thing was touched. No one comes here, Skarnock said, very low, and it was not a contradiction of the evidence but a reckoning with it. No one comes here but the keeper and the directorate under seal, and none of us has been down since the 9th seal woke, saving myself yesterday, and I stood there and not here, for I had no cause to approach the altar, the reckoning being not yet come. He touched the very edge of the scuff, as Harry had without disturbing it, and lifted his gloved fingertip to the lamp, and on it lay a trace of something fine and pale and faintly, wrongly gleaming, not the gray of the deep's own stone, but a paler grit with a shine in it. This is not the dust of the deep. This is chalk, and something in the chalk that shines, which is the mark of a curse-breaker's tracing powder, that such men use to find the lines of a ward they mean to unpick, so that they may copy the ward and pass it, or cut it and break it. Someone has been at the wards of the seal chamber, Harry Potter. Someone skilled and patient and careful enough to leave only this, which he would have taken up too had a person of the right height come looking at the right hour, which no one but a child would have done, and so the one flaw in a very good piece of work is that its maker did not reckon on being examined by someone small. He stood slowly, and his voice when it came again had gone flat and cold and precise, the reckoner's voice stripped down to its working edge. The blood seal cannot be faked and cannot be taken. It would know a false hand, and it is warded past any single thief. But a curse breaker does not always come to take. Sometimes he comes to learn. And a curse breaker who has learned the wards of this chamber and mapped them and gone back up the stair to whoever hired him is a curse breaker who has sold the one thing that stands between the reckoning and disaster, which is the answer to the question of how a person might reach this altar, on the day the third tide turns, with the whole nation watching the claimant and not the door, and due to the blood seal in one moment what 3 centuries of wards were built to prevent forever. Harry had gone very quiet, and it was the quiet of a mind at work and not of a mind afraid, and after a moment he asked the question that Skarnock had been dreading, because it was the correct question and it had only one answer, and the answer was the worst one. "The dragon," Harry said. "You told me the dragon knows everyone who comes down by a sound the nation makes, and it knows the wardens by their blood, and a false warden never even reaches the court because the dragon settles it first. So the dragon guards the only stair down here, and you said no one comes to the seal chamber but the keeper and the directorate under seal." He looked up, and the lamp put 2 coins of light in his eyes. "So the curse breaker who left the chalk didn't come down the stair, or the dragon would have known a stranger's blood and stopped him, which means somebody made the sound of the nation for him. Somebody who's allowed past the dragon walked a curse breaker down the 1000th stair, past the ward, to your most sacred room, and stood over him while he mapped the seal and walked him back up, and neither of them was ever stopped because one of them belongs here." He said it without triumph, which was somehow worse than triumph. "It's not just the wizards, Master Reckoner, it can't be. A wizard can't pass the dragon. This needed a goblin." Skarnock did not answer at once, and the not answering was the answer, and Harry watched the old goblin arrive by the same cold road, at the place Harry had already reached, and hate the arriving. "Yes," Skarnock said finally, and the word came out of him like a tooth. It needed a goblin, or the aid of one. A curse breaker of the surface, however skilled, cannot make the sound of the nation, and cannot carry another's blood past a ward that reads blood, and cannot know the turning of the wards of this chamber, which are not written in any register a wizard could steal. Someone of the deep opened the road for him. And that, Harry Potter, is a wound of a wholly different order than a forged deed, because a forged deed is only a wizard being a wizard, and this is a goblin being false to the nation, which we do not have a punishment for, because in 3,000 years we have so rarely needed one. He looked down at the shining trace of chalk on his glove. "Do not say the word aloud that you are both of us thinking. Nargpest came to the Mint Cavern last night and told you, to your face, that he would oppose you inside the law and not a hair outside it, and I have known him 90 years, and I would have staked my post that he meant it. But he is not the only goblin in the mountain who thinks the deep should be kept by the deep, and a leader's words are not always kept by the followers who catch only the anger of them and none of the honor. Whoever did this may have done it in Nargpast's name and without his knowledge, or in the wizard's pay and against Nargpast's whole creed, or for reasons that belong to none of them. We do not know, and that in the last tide before the reckoning is the most dangerous thing of all, that the hand that touched the altar wears our own coat, and we cannot yet say whose arm is in the sleeve. He looked at Harry across the altar, and the ancient blood and the traitor scuff of shining chalk, and one tide remained. They cannot take the wardenship from you by a true claim, Scarnock said, for your blood answers and theirs does not, and we will hang Emeric Greaves' forgery on the neck of the wrong dead king before the reckoning is called. So they have stopped trying to win the reckoning. Someone, Harry Potter, has decided instead to break it here at the altar. In the one moment the bond cannot be adjourned and the tide cannot be turned back, and to see the wardenship lapse into ruin and reversion in the confusion of a thing gone wrong in the deep. We have a tide. We had a forgery to disprove and a concordat to learn and a word for you to choose in secret, and now we have this also, a curse-breaker's map in an enemy's hands and a sacred altar that has been touched by a stranger. So we will not sleep this tide either. Come away from the altar, do not put your hand near the seal. We go up and we go to Ragnarok, because a thing done to the blood seal is a thing done to the nation, and the whole nation is about to learn that the deep was entered while it argued in its courts, and I would rather it learned it from the keeper than from the wreckage. He took up the lamp, and its light was the color of a coin held to a candle, and it fell on the small figure crouched at the foot of the altar and the shining trace of chalk between them. And far up the gallery, the door of the warden's vault glowed its faint closed-eye glow in the dark, warm still, perhaps, from the touch of the hand it had waited 3 centuries to feel. Harry rose from the foot of the altar and looked once more at the peppercorn of ancient blood under its dome of crystal, the light his forebear had left on, and then he turned and followed the lamp back up the gallery toward the long climb and the shorter time, carrying up the 1000th stair the memory of 10,000 singing voices, the silver words of a man who asked nothing, and 1 grain of traitor's chalk that a room full of tall and careful goblins had walked past and only a child had seen. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The coveter's gambit. Prosper Vane did not like the room Emeric Greaves had chosen for the meeting, because it was the private parlor of a wine merchant off Diagon Alley, and it smelled of other men's pleasures, and Prosper Vane conducted his business in rooms that smelled of nothing at all. He sat with his back straight and his hands squared on the table and did not touch the wine that had been poured for him, and he waited for Greaves to stop performing hospitality and start being useful, which took, by Vane's private count, 4 minutes longer than it should have. "You are anxious," Greaves observed at last, settling into the chair opposite with his own glass, "and you needn't be. The deed is sound. The deed is examined," said Vane. His voice was flat and even, a voice that had been trained across 11 years to give away nothing, and it gave away nothing now. "You laid a document on the Goblin nation's own stand and invited its own keeper to test its seal against its own registers. I would not have advised it. You did not ask my advice. I am here to understand the size of the error before it is charged to my account as well as yours, because I have staked the ministry's position on the reversion of those vaults, and a man does not stake the ministry on a forgery he has not personally read." Greaves' smile did not move, because Greaves' smile never moved, which was the first thing Vane had noted about him, and the reason he trusted him precisely as far as a squared corner. "It is not a forgery," Greaves said. "It is a restoration. The House of Selwyn did hold a lien over the deep vaults. That is history. The original deed was lost in a fire in the last century, as so many inconvenient originals are. What I laid on the stand is a faithful reconstruction of a true instrument, sealed with a true mint mark of the correct age, sourced at considerable expense from a party in a position to supply such things. It says what the lost original said. It is true in substance. It is merely young in body. And no goblin alive can prove the difference, because the mark is right. The mark," said Vane, "is the thing their keeper is at this hour comparing against 400 years of registers, with a 6-year-old at his elbow who found the one flaw in your other operation. He let that sit. He had a way of letting things sit that was more expensive to the other party than any raised voice. Yes, I know about the chalk. I make it my business to know when an associate has commissioned work in a place I intend to profit from, because when the work is discovered, and it is discovered, the discovery lands on everyone at this table. You sent a curse-breaker into the deep Greaves. You found a goblin willing to walk him past the dragon. That was not in any plan you shared with me, and I do not like sharing the consequences of plans I did not price." For the first time Greaves' smooth surface showed a hairline. "You want the vaults reverted to the ministry as ownerless goods. I want them answerable to my client under the lien. Those are different endings, Vane, and we have agreed to reach the fork together and quarrel about it only once the child is out of the road. To get the child out of the road, the reckoning must fail. The lien might have done it politely. If the lien is now compromised, then the reckoning must be failed less politely, and for that I required a hand in the deep, and I have one, and you did not want to know the details, and now you're cross that you do not know them. Choose, deputy head. You cannot have both a clean conscience and a reverted vault. No one at this table can. That is why we are meeting in a room that smells of other men's pleasures and not in your office that smells of nothing. Vane was quiet for a while. He was not a man troubled by conscience, which he regarded as a tax the sentimental paid on their own competence. He was troubled by exposure, which was different and colder and more useful. He turned the situation over in the flat exact way he turned every situation, and he arrived at the conclusion he had walked into the room already suspecting, which was that Emeric Grieve had overreached, and that a wise man builds a door out of a room before the room catches fire. Then understand me, Vane said, and he squared his untouched glass a half-inch to the left so that its base sat true to the grain of the table, a gesture Grieve would not read and Vane did not intend him to. The ministry's position is the reversion, and the reversion I will pursue in daylight in the Wisengamot on the law, where I am untouchable, because arguing that a minor cannot hold a hazardous estate is not a crime. It is a Tuesday. What you do in the deep is yours. If it succeeds, I will be standing in the daylight with a lawful claim to administer whatever ruin you leave, and I will thank no one. If it fails, I will be standing in the same daylight, having done nothing but file honest writs, and I will know no curse breakers and no goblins and no chalk. You have built me an excellent position, Grieve, and the excellence of it is that it does not require me to be in the room when your part goes wrong. He rose and buttoned his gray coat to the throat. I will see you at the reckoning. Do not sit near me. He left the parlor that smelled of other men's pleasures, and out in the cold, clean air of the alley he permitted himself, for the length of one breath, the nearest thing he owned to satisfaction, which was the awareness of having arranged matters so that every possible ending profited a man who had promised nothing and signed nothing and would, whatever befell the child in the deep, walk home to a house that smelled of nothing at all. Emeric Grieve stayed in the wine merchant's parlor after Vane had gone, and he did not drink either, once he was alone, because the smile he wore for other men cost him something to keep, and he was glad to set it down. He waited until the light in the window had gone from gold to gray, and then a second visitor came not by the door, and Grieve did not turn to look at the figure that settled into the chair Vane had left, because he had been told, more than once and with a coldness that outmatched his own, that he was not to look, and Grieve was a man who had learned which instructions were worth the wage they came with. The deputy head has taken his hand off the table, Grieve said to the wall, as I said he would. He will file his honest writ and stand in the daylight and know none of us. That is well. It leaves the deep to me, and the deep to me is the deep to you. He turned the empty glass a slow quarter turn on the wood. The registers have gone against the deed. Their keeper has a rubbing, and a child who reads dies like a mint master, and by tomorrow the whole nation will know the mark is wrong, so the polite road is shut. That leaves the one you have already walked, and I need to know it is walked to the end and not the middle, because a thing done to the middle in that room tomorrow will hang us both, and I do not intend to be hung for another party's failure of nerve. The figure in the other chair spoke, and its voice was low and level and carried no warmth and no fear, only the flat certainty of a thing decided long ago. It said that the road was open. It said that the wards of the sealed chamber had been mapped and the map was learned, and that on the day of the reckoning, when the whole of the nation stood watching the claimant at the altar and the tide was on the turn and the bond could not be adjourned, there was a moment, a single moment between the answering of the seal and the vesting of the ward, when the blood seal would be lifted from its armature and held bare in the open air to receive the living blood, and that in that moment the seal would be, for the first time in 374 years, outside its warding and vulnerable to a hand that already stood inside the ring of those permitted near. It said that a seal cannot be faked and cannot be stolen, but that it can be broken, and that a blood seal broken in the very instant of the answering would not merely stop the reckoning. It would poison it, would leave the bond half-woken and unanswerable, would send the whole concordat into the ruin of Clause the 11th with no living warden and no clean lapse but only wreckage, out of which the patient and the lawful might, in the seasons after, draw whatever they could reach. And you will be the hand, Grieve said. The figure said nothing, which Grieve understood to be assent, and then it said one thing more, and it was the only thing it said that had any heat in it at all, and the heat was not for Grieve and not for gold. It said that it did this for the deep, that the wizard's coin was a convenience and not a reason, that a nation which would bow its neck to a human child over the substance of its own mountain had already broken faith with itself, and deserved to be spared the shame by whatever hand loved it enough to bear the doing. And then it was gone out the way it had come, and Emeric Grieve sat alone in the graying parlor with an empty glass and a plan walked to its end, and found that for once his unmoving smile had left him entirely, because there is a kind of cold that even a cold man does not like to sit near, and he had just been sitting next to it, and it had talked about love. Albus Dumbledore was arranging matters also in his own idiom, which differed from Vane's chiefly in that Dumbledore had, somewhere under the long calculation, a boy he actually loved, and the love did not make the calculation warmer, it made it more careful. He had spent the tide since the reading in the Wisengamot's library, and in 3 private conversations he did not record, and he had established, to his own satisfaction, the shape of Vane's play. The ministry meant to argue the reversion on the law of ownerless goods, and to argue it well, and Dumbledore knew he could not simply defeat it, because the law of escheat was real and old, and Vane had read it better than the sentimental ever did. So Dumbledore did not plan to defeat it. He planned to make it unnecessary, which is a harder and quieter kind of victory, and the only kind that lasts. If the reckoning succeeded, if the child answered the seal and the wardenship vested in a living warden, then there was no lapse, and no lapse meant no ownerless goods, and no ownerless goods meant that Prosper Vane's beautiful writ was a key cut for a lock that no longer existed. The whole of the ministry's threat hung on the reckoning failing. Which meant, Dumbledore reflected, sitting alone with his half-moon spectacles pushed up and his eyes shut in the Wisengamot's dim library, that everyone who wanted the vaults, however they disagreed about the ending, agreed absolutely about the middle. The child must not answer the seal. And a threat that has narrowed to a single point is a threat that has told you exactly where it will fall. He did not know the shape of the blow, and he was too old to pretend to himself that he did. He knew only its target and its hour, the reckoning, the answering of the seal, the one moment the bond could not be adjourned. So he prepared the only defense a man can raise against a blow whose shape he cannot see, which is presence. He arranged, through the liaison protocols, and a favor too that he did not enjoy calling in, to be permitted at the reckoning not merely as an observer but as the child's guardian across the surface. And he set his affairs at the school in the hands of his deputy, and he told no one where he was going, and he carried, in a pocket he did not mention to anyone, a single instrument of his own devising that would, if a working of malice were loosed in a warded room, grow warm against his ribs, a heartbeat before the room understood it. A heartbeat was not much. Albus Dumbledore had won and lost a great deal on less, and he had learned, across a hard century, that the difference between the men who arrived in time and the men who arrived to the wreckage was very often exactly one heartbeat, and the willingness to have already decided what to do with it. He went once to see Harry in the guest cell of the upper bank where the child was lodged between his descents, and the visit taught Dumbledore more than his 3 unrecorded conversations had, and not the thing he had gone to learn. He had gone meaning to offer help. He was after all still in law a party who might stand as the child's guardian in the surface courts, and there was a version of the tide in which Albus Dumbledore made himself indispensable to the child's cause, and thereby kept his hand on the tiller of the child's life for another decade, and he had walked to the guest cell more than half intending to become that version because it was safer, and because he had grown old enough to distrust the safety of his own good intentions and to indulge them anyway. He found Harry sitting cross-legged on the floor with the Concordat's copy open before him and the roll of the Goblin's succession beside it, checking one against the other by the light of a Goblin lamp, and the child looked up at the greatest wizard of the age with a clear and friendly and entirely unintimidated attention, and said, "You're the observer. You bowed to me on the way out. You're the only one of the 3 who did." He considered Dumbledore for a moment with the look he gave to things that obeyed rules he had not yet worked out. "You want to help me, but you also want something, because everybody down here wants something. That's not an insult, it's just true. What do you want?" And Albus Dumbledore, who had been asked hard questions by frightened wizards and cruel ones and dying ones across 100 in some years, found himself asked the hardest and simplest by a 6-year-old on a floor, and discovered that he did not wish to lie to him, which was itself information and rare. "I want you to be safe," he said, and it was true, and he let the child hear that it was true and also that it was not the whole. "And I find, to be near enough to you when you are grown to be of use, because I believe there are storms ahead of you that have nothing to do with these vaults, and I would rather have your trust in my pocket when they come than have to earn it in the rain. That is a selfish answer, wearing an unselfish coat, Harry, and you ask plainly, so I have given it to you plainly, because I think you are a person who will punish a smooth answer harder than an honest one." Harry looked at him for a while. "Thank you," he said at last. "That's the most honest anybody's been except the Goblins and Nardpast, who wants me to lose." He turned back to his documents, and then, without looking up, he said the thing that Dumbledore carried away with him up the stair and turned over for a long time after. "You can be near me, I don't mind, but I'm going to answer the seal myself with my own word that nobody helped me pick. Scarnock says the deep can tell a coached word from a true one. So the one thing you can't do, even to keep me safe, is give me the word. That has to be mine, or the whole thing falls down." He found his place on the page with his finger. "You can help with everything else." Dumbledore left the guest cell, having offered no guardianship, made no arrangement, cut no key, and he walked up the 1000th stair, a man who had come to place his hand on a tiller and had been told, courteously, by the ship, that it would steer itself and he was welcome aboard. He was not offended. He was, in the private place where he kept the accounts he showed no one, something close to glad, because a boy who would not let even Albus Dumbledore choose his word was a boy with a wall inside him that no dark thing would climb easily either, and there were, Dumbledore thought, worse walls to have, and he had spent his life failing to build one half so good in himself. Down in the Mint Cavern, the wall was being built one dead king at a time. Harry and Skarnock had been at it through 2 watches of the tide, and the reading bench was covered now with open registers and the thin red roll of the succession, and a slate on which Skarnock had drawn, in the exact hand of a reckoner who distrusted memory, a table of kings and years and the master dies each reign had used. The crystalled Selwyn deed lay at the center of it, and beside it lay a rubbing Skarnock had taken of its mint mark under the witness of 2 directorate scribes, so that no one could later say the reckoner had examined a mark and then changed it. "Say it back to me," Skarnock said, "from the beginning. If you can teach it to me, you understand it, and if you cannot, you only think you do, and a warden who only thinks he understands his own proof is a warden who will be taken apart in the reckoning by a man who understands it better. Teach me, Harry. Pretend I am Ragnarok and I am inclined against you. Why is this deed a lie?" Harry stood up on the bench so that his eyes were level with the slate, because he had learned that a small person arguing must first solve the problem of being looked down at, and he set his finger on the rubbing of the deed's seal. The deed says it was made in 1547. To prove it's real, it has a goblin mint mark on it, because a goblin document needs a goblin seal, and goblin seals are hard to fake, so Grieve had to put a real-looking mark on it. And here's the thing he got wrong, and he got it wrong because he's a wizard and he doesn't think the way the mint thinks. He tapped the slate table of reigns. The mint doesn't use one mark forever. Every time a new king takes the mountain, the mint cuts a new master die with the new king's sign in it. You showed me. So a seal isn't just a picture, it's a fingerprint of which king was reigning the day it was struck. The mark on this deed is the mark of the master die with the sign of King Gornuk in it. You told me Gornuk's sign is the split mountain with the star above the left peak. It is, said Skarnock. Go on, you are not yet at the killing stroke. So I looked up King Gornuk in the succession roll. Harry drew the thin red roll toward him and set his finger on the line. Gornuk didn't take the mountain until 1591. He wasn't king in 1547. In 1547 the king was Ragnarok III, and Ragnarok III's die had the closed mountain with 3 stars, which is a completely different mark, which is right here in the register for the 1540s. He put the 2 registers side by side, the one open at the 1540s and the one open at the 1590s, and the 2 mint marks sat there, plain and different, one belonging to the year the deed claimed, and one belonging to the year the deed's actual seal had been struck. So the deed says 1547, but its seal was cut with a die that didn't exist until 1591, 44 years later. A real deed from 1547 would have Ragnarok III's mark, because that's the die the mint had then. This one has Gornuk's mark because whoever made the fake got a real old die to strike it with, so it would pass a touch test, but the die they got their hands on was the wrong age because they thought any old goblin die would do because they didn't know a die is a date. It isn't a picture of the nation, it's a picture of one particular king, and you can't put a king on a document before he was crowned. He looked at Skarnock level on the bench. It's not even a good forgery. It's a great forgery of the wax and the skin and the ink, and a stupid forgery of the one thing that couldn't be faked, which is time. Grieve made everything old except the only thing that mattered. Now break your own proof, Skarnock said, before your enemy does, because a proof you have not attacked yourself is a proof you have merely admired. I am Grieve. I stand before the reckoning and I say, the die was an heirloom. Gornuk's die, yes, but the mint keeps old dies, and a clerk in 1547 took down the wrong one from the rack, an antique, decades out of date, and struck my true deed with it in error. A clerk's mistake, not a forger's. The deed is genuine, only the seal is anachronistic through simple carelessness. What do you say to me, Warden? I have just given the court a way to keep your registers and my deed both. Harry did not answer at once, and Skarnock watched him not answer and was satisfied, because a child who answered that at once would not have understood it. You say the mint kept old dies on a rack and a clerk grabbed the wrong one, Harry said slowly. But Gornuk's die is from 1591, that's 44 years after your deed. In 1547, Gornuk's die didn't exist yet, it hadn't been cut. There was no antique to grab because the antique wouldn't be made for another 44 years. A clerk in 1547 can grab a die that's too old. He can't grab one that hasn't been born. He put his finger back on the succession roll. The only way that seal gets onto a deed is if the deed was sealed in 1591 or later, when Gornuk's die existed. So even your best excuse proves my point. The seal can only be later than the die, and the die is 1591, so the deed is 1591 at the earliest, which is 44 years after the date it claims, which is 19 years after the Concordat, which means Selwyn's lien isn't older than my wardenship at all. It's younger. It doesn't come first. It comes last. He looked up. There's no clerk you can invent who reaches backward through time to a die that isn't cut. That's the wall. It doesn't have a door. Skarnock was silent, and then he did the goblin thing that was not a smile and was worth more than one. That, he said, is the killing stroke, and you have it whole, and you have it in an order that a hostile chieftain cannot break, because it does not rest on my word or on your cleverness, but on 2 registers that the nation itself keeps, and that no one can accuse of loving you. When you lay this before the reckoning, Harry Potter, you will not accuse Emeric Grieve of forgery. You will do something far worse to him. You will ask him courteously before the whole nation to tell the court which king's mark is upon his deed, and he will not know because he never knew a mark was a king, and then you will tell him, and you will watch a man's whole house fall out from under him on the answer to a question he thought was about a picture. He gathered the rubbing and the 2 registers with the care of a being handling a loaded thing. We will seal these under the scribe's witness and carry them to the reckoning ourselves, and let no hand but ours touch them, because a proof this clean is exactly the proof an enemy will try to muddy, and a mudded proof is worse than none, for it teaches the court to distrust the very registers we are relying on. Guard the chain of it as you would guard the blood seal. This is your second wall, Harry. The first is your blood, the second is this. And the third, the one I cannot build for you, and you must build alone in the dark, is still your word, and you have one tide left to choose it. He had also that tide to tell Nargpest, because the law required that the under-reckoner be informed of a wound to the wards, and because Skarnock had decided, after 90 years of measuring him, that of all the persons in the mountain Nargpest was the one who could least bear a lie and would therefore be, in this one narrow matter, the truest ally a claimant could own. So he brought the under-reckoner down to the mint cavern and set before him the chalk on the glove and the rubbing of the mapped wards that the scribes had taken from the seal chamber floor, and told him flatly that a curse breaker had been walked past the dragon by a hand that wore the nation's coat, and that the hand was not yet named. Nargpast heard it out to the last word and did not move, and when Skarnock had finished, the under-reckoner stood very still in the cold brass light, and the thing that came into his face was not the cold accounting Harry had seen in him before. It was colder than that, and it was aimed inward at his own nation, and Harry, watching from the bench, understood that he was seeing an honorable being learn that his cause had been taken up by a hand he would have cut off sooner than shake. "You think it is mine," Nargpast said. It was not a question, and there was a low danger in it. "I think," said Skarnock, "that whoever did this may have caught the anger of your creed without the honor of it, and done in your name a thing you would forbid, and I am telling you to your face in a warded room precisely because I do not believe you ordered it, for a goblin who would walk a wizard's curse-breaker to the altar of the nation is a goblin with no creed at all, only an appetite, and you Nargpast, whatever else you are not hungry in that way. But I have known you 90 years, and I have never before had cause to say those words aloud, and the tide is short, so hear the rest of it. Someone of the deep is false, the reckoning is tomorrow, and I would rather hunt him with you than around you." For a long moment the under-reckoner said nothing, and the mint cavern held the silence, and then Nargpast turned to Harry on the bench, and looked at the child with an expression that had been stripped of everything except its truth. "Understand me, claimant, for I will not say this twice, and I will not say it warmly. I want you to lose the reckoning. I will stand tomorrow and argue, on the letter, every lawful thing that can be argued to keep the deep in the hands of the deep. That has not changed and will not. But there is a thing I want more than I want you to lose, and it is that my nation not be shamed, and a goblin who sells the wards of the seal chamber to a wizard for gold has shamed us in a way that 100 wizard wardens could not, because a wizard taking what we granted him is only a wizard. A goblin selling what we swore to keep is the nation rotting from inside its own coat. I will not have it. I would sooner see you invested honestly tomorrow and bow to you and hate it than see you fail by a treason worn in my colors, so I will hunt him with you, not for you, against him. Do not mistake the one for the other, and do not thank me because I am not doing you a kindness. I am doing the nation one, and you happen to be standing in the light of it." He turned back to Skarnock. "Show me the rubbing of the wards." If he mapped the chamber, he touched the descent wards to bring the wizard down, and the descent wards keep a tally of every hand that turns them, which the seal chamber does not, because no one ever thought the seal chamber needed watching from within the nation. Whoever walked the curse-breaker down left his count on the stair, and I know the tally of the descent, because it is beneath my office, and there are not 30 goblins in the mountain permitted to turn it, and by tomorrow's tide I will have crossed off the 29 who did not. Skarnock gave him the rubbing, and the 2 old goblins bent over it, opponent beside opponent, and Harry watched them from the bench and understood a thing about honor that number 4 had never had the equipment to teach him. That 2 people could want opposite endings and stand shoulder to shoulder against a third who wanted to reach the ending by a crooked road, and that this was not a contradiction but very nearly the whole of what a law was for. He did not say it aloud. He kept it in the place where he kept true things, next to the word he had not yet chosen. They did not in the end get the tide entirely to themselves, because the enemy, having learned through the porous upper floors that the deed's examination had gone against them, made their last daylight move, and it was Vane's, and it was, as Vane's things were, clean and legal and cold. On the morning before the reckoning, a ministry owl came down to the bank bearing a writ under the seal of the Wisengamot's bench, and it did not attack the Concordat, because Vane had given up the deed as Grieve's dead weight, and it did not mention the deep, because Vane knew nothing of any chalk. it did a simpler and colder thing. It asserted that Harry James Potter, being 6 years of age and a minor in the care of Muggle guardians, could not lawfully absent himself from the surface into the custody of a foreign power, which was to say the Goblin nation, without the consent of a magical guardian appointed by the ministry, and it named as the proposed guardian an officer of the Office of Estate and Estates, and it required the child to be produced at the ministry within 1 day for the appointment to be made. It was a beautiful instrument. It did not need to win. It only needed to be obeyed for 1 day, and 1 day was the last tide, and a warden produced at the ministry on the morning of the reckoning was a warden who was not in the deep to answer the seal when the third tide turned, and the wardenship would lapse for non-appearance, and Prosper Vane would walk into the daylight and administer the ruin, having done nothing but file an honest writ about the welfare of a child. Ragnarok read the writ in the reckoning hall with Harry and Skarnock before him and set it down and said, "The ministry has found the one lever that is truly theirs. They cannot reach into the deep, but they can reach the surface, and the child must cross the surface to reach the deep, and they have put a writ across the door of the surface. If we defy it, we hand them a second grievance, that the goblins abducted a child against the Wisengamot's own bench, and they will bring the Aurors to the gates, and I will not have blood at the gates of Gringotts over a boy of 6 if there is any other road." He looked at Harry. "There is a question in this for you, claimant, and I will not answer it for you, because you told my nation you would answer the seal with your own word, and I begin to think you had better answer this with your own too. The writ says you cannot cross to the deep without a magical guardian. It names a ministry officer. But a writ that requires a guardian is a writ that can be answered by a guardian if the guardian is one the bench cannot refuse. Is there a magical adult, Harry Potter, whom you would trust to walk you to the door of the deep and no further, and whom the Wisengamot could not deny, and who would not, once holding your hand on the surface, try to keep hold of it?" And Harry, who had turned the writ over in the cold exact way he turned everything, and who had 3 watches earlier been told the truth by an old man on the far side of a plain question, said, "Yes, the observer, Dumbledore, he's on the bench himself, so they can't say he's not good enough. And he already told me the one thing he can't do is choose my word, and he agreed. He wants to be near me later, so he won't try to grab me now and spoil it, because grabbing me now is how you lose someone for good, and he's too clever for that." He looked up at Ragnarok. "He's the only wizard in the whole story who wants something from me that he can only get by letting me go, so he's the safe one to hold my hand across the surface. Ask him." Ragnarok regarded the child for a moment with the stillness of deep water, and then he inclined his head. "You reckon persons the way your keeper reckons seals," he said. "It is an unsettling gift in one so small, and I am glad, on the whole, that it is pointed at my enemies and not at me. It will be done. The observer will stand as your guardian across the surface, to the gate of the deep and no step beyond, and the ministry's writ will be answered by a member of its own bench, and Prosper Vane will find his lever pushing against a door that has quietly been taken off its hinges." He rose. "Go and sleep, claimant, if you can, though I did not sleep the night before my own reckoning, and I do not expect you to. 1 tide remains, your blood is ready, your proof is sealed. Tomorrow you go down to answer for all of it. There is one thing left undone, and it is the only thing none of us can do for you, and you know what it is." Harry knew what it was. Skarnock walked him back to the guest cell himself, which he had not done before, and at the door he stopped, and said the thing he had been holding through the whole of the writ and the choosing, because it belonged last, and he was a reckoner who set things in their order. "Nargpast has not found the traitor," he said. "He has crossed off 28 of the 30 who may turn the descent wards, and 2 remain, and the tide will turn before he can clear them, which means the goblin who sold the road to the Cursebreaker will stand somewhere in that hall tomorrow in the nation's own coat, near enough to the altar to have earned the right to be near it, watching you answer the seal. I cannot tell you which one. I have failed to find him, and I will not dress the failure up as a plan. So I will give you the only thing I have, which is the truth, and the truth is this. Tomorrow, when the whole nation is looking at your blood, there will be one person in the hall looking at the seal, and he will not mean the seal well, and you are the only one small enough and strange enough to be watching the room when everyone else is watching the miracle. You found a grain of chalk that 100 tall, careful goblins walked past. Watch the floor, Harry. Whatever else happens at that altar, watch the floor." And he left the child at the door with that, because a good warning is not softened at the end, and Harry took it in and kept it, next to the word he had not yet chosen and the proof he had sealed and the blood that was already his, a 4th thing to carry down, and the heaviest, because it was the one that asked him to be afraid on purpose and go anyway. He slept a little in the guest cell, and then he woke in the goblin dark that had no morning in it, and he lay on his back and did the thing the whole tide had been building to, which was to choose his word. He thought about the plant that grew toward a sun it could not see. He thought about the door of the warden's vault warming under his hand, and the 10,000 voices in the 7th vault, and the silver words of a man who asked nothing, and the peppercorn of blood a stranger 3 centuries dead had sealed in gold, so that a child in a cupboard could one day be found even if no one knew his name. He thought about what a warden was, which was not a lord who commanded, but a person who kept, who stood in cold doorways, who answered. And he understood that the word could not be a grand word, because a grand word was a word chosen to be heard by the court, and the deep did not care about the court, the deep cared about the person. It had to be a true word, a small true word that was the whole of what he actually was, under the cleverness and the reckoning and the wall he had built to keep number 4 out. He turned it over in the dark for a long time, and when he found it, he knew it was the one, because it did not make him feel large. It made him feel like the plant in the dark room, reaching, and he did not say it aloud, not even to the dark, and he held it in the place where he kept the things that were true and that no one could take, along with the clock and the light and the old latch and the marble with the frozen breath. And he waited for the tide to turn and did not tell a soul, because it was his, and it was, the deep had promised, the thing the deep cared most about. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The reckoning. The nation came down for the reckoning, and the deep, which had lain in its enormous patience for 374 winters, seemed to lean up a little to meet it. They came down the 1,000th stair in their thousands, in the deep gray and the older black, the reckoners and the smiths and the tellers and the warders, the makers of things and the keepers of things and the counters of things, down past the marks of the chisels and past where the chisels stopped and the walls went smooth and grown, down past the pale blind dragon that lifted its great filmed eye and let the whole nation buy on the sound the nation made. And out along the gallery of the undermost tier, where the 13 glowing black doors stood in their row, and the low unhearable note of the old magic ran under all their feet like a held breath the mountain had not yet decided to release. The lamps they carried were the color of coins held to candles, and there were so many of them that the gallery, which Harry had first seen lit by a single lamp swallowed in dark, blazed now from end to end with a deep and secret gold, and the black doors of the 13 glowed brighter for the company, and above each door the single figure of the deep count burned clear, and Harry, brought down at the head of the procession with Scarnock at his side, walked the length of his inheritance through a corridor of the whole living nation that owed it to him, and did not run and did not hurry, and kept his hand from the doors, and held in the still center of himself the one word he had told no one. They had come in their orders, and Harry, who counted things, had watched the orders come and learned the nation by the manner of them. The smiths came first behind the directorate, in leather scored and starred with the small burns of their trade, and they carried nothing, because a smith at a reckoning carries only his hands, which are the nation's proof that it still makes. Then the reckoners in gray with the slates and styluses of their office, who kept the nation's memory and would keep the memory of this. Then the warders who kept its doors, and among them the warders of the descent who had the right to stand near the deepest of those doors, and Harry did not yet know to look at their boots. Then the tellers and the counters and the assiers, and behind them the makers of lesser things and the keepers of lesser vaults, and behind them, filling the gallery to its unseen roof, the whole ordinary vast body of the nation, the mothers and the elders and the young ones held up on shoulders to see, because a reckoning of the undermost tier came perhaps once in the memory of the oldest goblin living, and no one who could come stayed away. For the deep was the thing they all held in common under whatever else divided them, and today the deep was being answered. Harry walked at the head of all of it, and understood that he was not the point of the procession, the deep was the point of the procession, and that this precisely was the whole meaning of a warden, to be the small door through which a nation looked at the thing it loved. He had been walked to the gate of the deep by Albus Dumbledore, as Ragnarok had arranged and the ministry's own writ had required, and at the gate at the 9th landing where the dragon lay the old wizard had stopped, because his guardianship ran to the surface and not a step beyond, and he had crouched down to the child's height, which the great of the world rarely do, and had said a small number of words that Harry kept. He had not said be brave, because a person who must be told to be brave has already been made afraid by the telling. He had said, I will be as close as the law and your enemies allow, which is closer than they think and further than I would like. You have built 3 walls, 2 I have seen and admired. The 3rd I have not seen, because you have shown it to no one, which is why it is the strongest. When the moment comes that everyone in that room is looking at your blood, look at the room. You are the only person there small enough to see the floor. And then he had gone up into the surface, and Harry had gone down into the deep, and the gate of the dragon had closed the 2 of them apart, guardian and ward, each to the part of the reckoning that was his. The tide was in it now, and Harry could feel the tide, though he could not have said with which sense. It was not water, or not only water. It was the deep breathing, the slow, enormous respiration of the old magic in the roots of the mountain that the goblins had learned to count as 3 turnings, and had built their gravest law around, and the 3rd turning was on it, and the whole gallery seemed to lean with the pull of it, the 13 glowing doors dimming and brightening in a rhythm too slow to be a pulse and too certain to be chance, as a shore leans with a sea it has known so long it has stopped noticing it lanes. The nation felt the tide too. Harry could see it in them, In the way the ranks of gray and black stood a degree straighter as the turning came on, 10,000 goblins in the deepest hall of their world holding themselves to the attention that a people gives, once in many lifetimes, to the keeping or the losing of the thing that is oldest in it. He was 6 years old, and he stood at the head of them, and the tide lined, and the doors breathed their slow gold light, and he held his one word in the still place and waited to be allowed to spend it. The seal chamber had been opened out for the reckoning, its round wall drawn back by the craft of the deep into a great domed hall, and the dome of it was the living rock, unhewn, folded and veined and hung with the slow interior light that lived in the deep stone, so that the whole roof glowed very faintly with tides of gold and green and coal red moving in it, a sky of stone lit from within, and it was more beautiful and more grave than any cathedral roof raised under the actual sky. Because a cathedral is a thing men build to reach toward what they revere, and this was the thing revered itself, opened for 1 hour to let a nation stand inside its heart. At the center of it stood the low altar of black stone with the answering basin of gold, and above the basin, held in its armature of goblin silver, the blood seal, the disk of pale gold with the peppercorn of hardwind potter's blood sealed beneath its skin, waiting under the dome of clear crystal to receive, across 374 years, the answer of the living blood of his line. Around the altar in a ring stood the Directorate, the 12, in the black that only the 12 might wear, and Ragnarok at their head. Behind the 12 stood the officers of the deep, the reckoners and the warders in their ranks, and behind them the nation, filling the domed hall to its shadowed height, and at the edge of the inner ring, in the place the liaison protocols allowed them, stood the 2 wizards who had come to watch a wardenship fail, Prosper Vane in his ministry gray, squared and cold and certain, and Emeric Grieve with his black leather case and his smile, and his ruin walking toward him one clause at a time, though he did not yet know it. Ragnarok lifted his hand, and the domed hall came to silence under it, and into the silence the low note of the deep ran up a single degree, and the reckoning began. "We are come to answer a bond," Ragnarok said, and his voice, which was old and dry and not loud, filled the hall the way water fills a cup without effort to the brim. The concordat of the deep vaults sealed the 12th day of October in the wizard's year 1612, in the 4th year of the reign of Urgok, king under the mountain, whose seal is upon it, and whose word the nation has kept for 374 winters unbroken. Its 9th seal has woken. A potter of the blood is living and is here, and the tide has turned twice and turns now a 3rd and final time while we stand, and before it has finished turning the 9th seal shall be answered or shall lapse forever, for the bond does not adjourn and I will not ask it to. But a bond is not answered over unheard challenges. 2 have been laid against this claim. They will be heard and disposed, and only then will the blood be asked to answer the blood. The nation keeps its word by keeping its order. Master Grieve, you laid a deed upon my stand. It has lain under crystal in the nation's keeping since. Stand and make your claim, or withdraw it, and let the reckoning proceed. Emeric Grieve stood and crossed to the altar side where a second stand had been set for the challenges, and opened his black leather case with the smooth confidence of a man who did not know that the ground had gone out from under him in a mint cavern 4 watches before, and he made again the claim of the house of Selwyn. A Leon of the year 1547, 65 years senior to the Concordat, never redeemed, never extinguished, superior to any wardenship the King Urgok had granted, so that whether the wardenship vested or lapsed, the vaults themselves answered first to Selwyn. He spoke well. He laid the green-sealed deed upon the challenge stand beside its own crystal hood, and he invited the nation, with a bow a degree too deep, to examine the mint mark and satisfy itself that the seal was a true seal of the Goblin nation, struck by the Goblin mint, as indeed he said, and here he permitted himself the faint warmth of a man playing a card he believes unbeatable. Their own keeper would confirm. "The claimant will answer the challenge," said Ragnarok. In the domed hall, the whole vast assembled nation of the deep turned its eyes upon a 6-year-old in a coat that had been his cousin's, and waited to see what he would do with a lie 65 years older than his country and dressed to pass. Harry did not go to the challenge stand. He had discussed this with Skarnok through the last watch of the tide, and they had agreed that a claimant who rushes to the stand looks like a claimant defending himself, and that Harry was not defending himself. He was going to ask a question. So he stayed where he was, small in the great ring, and he looked up at Emeric Grieve across the altar in the ancient blood, and he asked in a clear child's voice that carried in the silence to the shadowed roof, the question he and the old goblin had sharpened for exactly this moment. "Master Grieve," Harry said, "you keep asking everyone to look at the seal on your deed because it's a real goblin seal, and real goblin seals are hard to fake, so you must know the seal really well. Can you tell the court which king's mark it is?" Grieve's smile did not move because Grieve's smile never moved, but a stillness came into him that had not been there, the stillness of a man who has been asked, in a language he thought he spoke, a word he does not know. The mark, he said, is the authenticating mint mark of the Goblin nation. Struck. No, Harry said, not rudely, but the way you correct a smaller child who has guessed. That's not an answer. The nation doesn't have one mark. It has a new one for every king. Every time a king takes the mountain, the mint cuts a new die with his sign in it, and every seal it strikes after that carries that king's sign. So a seal isn't a picture of the nation, it's a fingerprint of which king was reigning the day it was struck. You didn't know that, did you? You thought any old goblin die would do as long as it looked ancient, so let me help you. The mark on your deed is the split mountain with the star above the left peak. That's the sign of King Gornuk. He turned, not to Grieve now, but to the ring of the Directorate, to Ragnarok at its head, and he laid the thing down in front of the whole nation, plainly, the way you lay a true thing on a table to see what a room will do with it. King Gornuk took the mountain in 1591. It's in the succession roll the nation keeps itself, that nobody can say loves me. In 1547, the year the deed says it was made, the king was Ragnarok III, and Ragnarok III's die was the closed mountain with 3 stars, a completely different mark. So a real deed from 1547 would carry Ragnarok III's mark. This one carries Gornuk's mark, which didn't exist until 1591, 44 years later, because Gornuk hadn't been crowned yet, because you can't put a king on a document before he's a king. Let it sit one heartbeat, the way Skarnuk had taught him, the way the deep taught everyone who lived in it long enough. The seal on that deed was cut with a die that wasn't born until 19 years after the Concordat. It isn't older than my wardenship, it's younger. The whole claim is that Selwyn came first, but the seal proves Selwyn came last. Master Grieve didn't forge a lie about the vaults. He forged a lie about time, and time is the one thing the mint writes down and never forgets. The Merrick Grieve was good, and a good advocate does not fall at the first stroke, and he reached in the silence for the one plank that a drowning man in his position might reach for, the plank that Skarnuk had made Harry break in the mint cavern so that it would already be broken when Grieve reached for it. A clerk's error, Grieve said, and the smoothness came back into his voice by main force, and he spread his hands to the Directorate as a reasonable man appealing to reasonable beings. The mint keeps its old dies. In the confusion of an old counting house, a clerk of 1547 took down the wrong die from the rack, an antique, mismarked, and struck a true and genuine deed with an out-of-date seal. A careless clerk, honored Directorate, is not a forger. The deed is real. Only its seal is by simple mischance of the wrong. You can't, Harry said, and he said it gently because it was nearly cruel, and he had decided he would not enjoy it even though a part of him, the part that had lived in a cupboard, wanted to. You can't take down the wrong die from the rack if the die isn't on the rack yet. Gornuk's die is from 1591. In 1547 it hadn't been cut, it didn't exist. There was no antique for your clerk to grab because the antique doesn't get made for another 44 years. A clerk can grab a die that's too old. He can't grab one that hasn't been born. He looked at Grieve, level and small and certain. Your excuse needs the die to already exist in 1547, but the whole problem is that it didn't. So the only way that seal ends up on that deed is if the deed was made in 1591 or later. Every road you take leads to the same year, and the year is always after the Concordat, never before it. There's no clerk, there's no antique, there's no error. There's just a deed that was made too late, pretending to be early, with a king's face on it that gives away the year no matter how you explain it. Grieve had no plank left, and he knew it, and the knowing showed at last in the one place he could not square, which was his hands, and he lowered them and said nothing further, and his silence was the loudest thing in the hall. The silence in the domed hall changed its nature. Skarnuk came forward and laid before the Directorate the sealed rubbing and the 2 registers. The one open at the 1540s with Ragnarok III's 3-starred mark, and the one open at the 1590s with Gornuk's single star, taken under the witness of 2 Directorate scribes so that no hand could be accused of altering them. And the 12 bent over them and passed them one to another, and the thing that ran through the assembled nation was not a murmur, because goblins do not murmur, but a settling, a vast quiet reweighing, the sound of a great many balances coming to rest on the same true side. Ragnarok looked at the registers a long moment, and then he looked at Merrick Grieve, and he did not raise his voice because the truth did not require it. You asked the nation to examine your seal, he said. The nation has examined it. It bears the mark of a king who was not crowned until 44 years after the date your deed claims. There is no clerk's error that reaches backward to a die not yet cut. There is no honest road by which a true deed of 1547 wears the face of a king of 1591. The deed is a forgery, and a bold one, and it named the wrong dead king, and it has been laid upon the stand of the nation and sworn genuine before the Directorate, which is not merely a lie but a lie told to the mountain in the mountain's own hall, and the mountain does not forget that either. He lifted one finger, and the warders behind Grieve moved a single pace inward, and Grieve's black leather case sat empty and useless on the challenge stand. The claim of the House of Selwyn is struck, and its advocate is detained to answer to the nation for a forgery sworn in the deep, which is a matter for goblin law and not for yours, Master Grieve, and you will find our law reads a false seal rather less warmly than your Wisengamot reads a false word. Sit him down. The first challenge is disposed. The claim is a lie, and the lie is younger than the truth it tried to bury. From the Ring of the 12, one of the directorate spoke, and it was an old voice, a female voice, dry as the archive itself, and Harry knew it before he saw her, because he had a memory for the shape of a true thing said, and this was the voice that had spoken in the dark of the round chamber the night the seal woke, though Harry had not been there to hear it and could not have known. I said when this began, said Grinda, oldest of the directorate, that we would owe this bond whether the debt was just or not, because we sealed it, and we are not wizards to unsay our seals when the season turns inconvenient. I say now a thing I did not expect to say. The debt is not only owed. It is defended, and it was defended in this hall by the heir himself at 6 years old, against a forgery that would have deceived the whole directorate had a small person not thought to look at a king's face and a mince memory. A wizard forged a lie to steal the deep. A wizard child unmade it to keep the deep honest. If any goblin here still doubts whether the blood of Hardwin Potter has kept faith with the mountain, let him weigh the 2 wizards who came down today, and choose which one he would rather stood warden over the thing that is oldest in us. I have chosen. Answer the seal, chieftain, I am done doubting. And she sat, and the settling that ran through the nation at her words was deeper than the one that had run at the registers, because a nation may be convinced by a proof, but it is moved by an elder, and Grinda had been an elder when Ragnarok was young. Grieve was sat down, and his smile had gone at last, and Prosper Vane, at the edge of the ring, moved his weight a careful half-inch away from the man beside him, a cold act of a man building the door out of a burning room he had promised himself he would never be caught inside. The second challenge is the ministry's, Ragnarok said. It asserted that the claimant, being a minor, could not cross into the deep without a magical guardian, and named a ministry officer, and required the child produced on the surface this morning. The challenge is answered by its own terms. The claimant crossed the surface in the guardianship of a member of the Wisengamot's own bench, Albus Dumbledore, whom the ministry cannot deny without denying its own bench, and who has surrendered him at the gate of the deep as the guardianship required and stands now upon the surface awaiting his return, having sought nothing and held nothing. The writ is satisfied. There is no lapse for non-appearance, for the claimant has appeared. Deputy Head Vane, your instrument was well made, and it has been answered by a hand you cannot refuse, and there is nothing further in it for the deep to hear. You may stay to witness as the protocols allow, or you may go up. I would counsel you to stay. A man in your office should see, once in his life, a bond honored, that he may know what the ownerless goods he administers looked like before they fell out of ownership, and grieve a little, if he still can, for how few of them fell honestly. Prosper Vane stayed. He did not answer because there was no writ to file against a bond that had not lapsed, and a man who keeps his edges square does not spend words where they cannot square anything. But he stayed at the edge of the ring and watched, and something in the flat, cold surface of him held very still, though whether it was calculation or the beginning of some colder cousin to shame not even Vane could have said. There was one more voice to be heard before the blood, and it belonged to the nation itself, and it was Nargpast who rose to give it from his place among the officers, and Harry watched him rise, and understood that this was the honorable opposition arriving at its appointed hour, in the open on the letter, exactly as it had promised in a cold mint cavern 2 watches ago. Chieftain, Nargpast said, I do not challenge the claimant's blood, for his blood is true, and I am no forger to pretend otherwise, and I do not challenge his proof, for I have seen it, and it is clean. I rise to set upon the record, before the seal is answered and cannot be unanswered, the reservation of those of us who hold that the deep should be kept by the deep, and that a bond which sets a human child over the substance of the mountain, however justly earned, is a weight the nation should not have been made to carry forever. I am overruled by the seal, and I know it, and I will bow to the seal, for that is what a goblin is. But let it be written that the nation went into this reckoning with its eyes open, and its disagreement spoken plainly and lawfully, and not smuggled and not sold, because there is a difference between an honest no and a treason, and I mean this hall to remember, after today, which of the 2 I gave. He inclined his head to Ragnarok the precise degree, and then before he sat, he crossed to Skarnok at the altar side and bent to the keeper's ear and said low, a thing that did not carry to the hall but carried to Harry, who was small and near and listening under everything. 28 of the 30 are crossed, 2 remain uncleared. Watch the descent orders in the inner ring, keeper. I could not finish the tally before the tide, whoever it is stands close to us now. Skarnok's face did not change, because a keeper's face does not change in the hall with the nation watching, but his gloved hand moved a fraction on the altar's edge, and Harry saw it move, and understood that the 3rd wall of his defense and the 1st wall of the nation's had just been told in the last moment before the blood, that the enemy was already inside the ring and had not yet been named. The challenges are disposed, Ragnarok said, and he turned from the wizards to the altar, and his voice changed, and the change ran through the whole nation, because the reckoning had passed now out of the country of law, and into the older country the law existed to serve. Let the blood answer the blood, Master Reckoner, bring the claimant to the altar, the tide is turning, let it not turn past us. Skarnok came to Harry and set his gloved hand for a moment on the child's shoulder, the one discourtesy of contact that a keeper is permitted at a reckoning, and it was not a discourtesy at all. It was the hand of a being who had bound himself to answer for every word of the bond that had brought this child down the stair, resting for one moment on the child he had answered for. Bent so that his coin-colored eyes were level with the child's serious ones, and he said low, for Harry alone, "Whatever comes at the altar, you have already done the part that was yours to do with your mind. What is left is the part that is yours to do with yourself. I cannot go with you into it, no one can. When the blood is given, give the word, and do not choose it in the moment to please the room, for the room cannot help you and the deep cannot be fooled. Give it the true one, you know which it is. You have carried it 2 tides and told no one, and that is exactly right, and it is the last and best of your 3 walls, and it is the only one I never had to teach you." Then he straightened and he led Harry to the altar of black stone, and the nation drew in close around them, the ring of the 12, and behind them the ranks of the officers, the reckoners and the warders in their places. And among the warders, in the 3rd rank of the inner ring, where a warder of the descent stood by his right to attend the reckoning of the wards he served, stood a goblin named Valgrok, whose Count Nargpast had been crossing off a tally through the last watch of the tide, and had not quite finished crossing. Valgrok stood in his place in the 3rd rank and watched the child brought to the altar, and felt nothing that he would have called fear, because he had settled his account with fear a season ago, on the night he had first walked the wizard's cursebreaker down the dark of the descent, and understood at the bottom of the stair that he had become a thing the nation had no word for and would have to invent one to hang. He had made his peace with the invented word. He told himself, standing in the risen anticipation of the hall, the thing he had told himself every watch of the season, which was that he did not do this for the wizard's gold, though he had taken the gold, and not for hatred of the child whom he had never met and did not hate, but for the deep, for the mountain, for the unbearable coming spectacle of 10,000 goblins bowing their necks to a human of 6 over the substance of their own heart. A shame he loved his nation too much to let it suffer. He believed it mostly. He had learned that a person can loose the anger of a creed and cut it free of the creed's honor, and still, if he does not look too closely, hear the anger and call it love. He did not look too closely. He watched the crystal lifted from the seal, and he counted in the cold and patient part of himself, toward the one moment the wards would be down and the eyes would be up, and he waited for it, and did not know that the smallest person in the hall had been told by an old keeper at a cell door to watch the floor. The rite was old, and Skarnok spoke it, and it was beautiful in the grave and terrible way the oldest things are beautiful. He lifted away the dome of clear crystal from the blood seal, and for the first time in 374 years, the disk of pale gold with its peppercorn of ancient blood stood bare in the open air of the deep, out of its warding, held only in the armature of goblin silver above the answering basin, and the low note of the old magic climbed another degree, and the 13 doors of the gallery beyond the hall pulsed once together, a slow beat of deep gold light. As a household holds its breath when the long-awaited one is brought at last to the hearth, in the deep gathered itself, Harry felt it gather. It was the same vast, slow attention he had felt at the door of the warden's vault, the turning of something the size of the mountain toward a single warm point, but where before it had been one door waking to one hand, now it was the whole of the undermost tier turning as one, all 13 keepings, all the strong places where the earth had been strong before the goblins came, leaning inward toward the bare seal and the child beside it. The great unhearable note deepening under everything until it was less a sound than a pressure in the marrow, the deep bending its ancient patience down at last to the one question it had held since a king it remembered sealed a bond it had witnessed: is the blood come home, and is the keeper worthy of the keeping? Harry stood in the center of that gathering attention, 6 years old, in a coat that had been his cousin's, and he did not feel large. He felt seen wholly and without discount, in a way that nothing in the whole of his 6 years had ever come near, by something old enough to have no interest in flattering him, and it was the most frightening and the most welcome thing that had ever happened to him, and he held his ground and held his word and waited. Skarnok drew from the altar a needle of goblin silver, thin as a hair and clean, and he turned to Harry, and he said in the reading voice that was also now something more than reading, "Harry James Potter, heir of the House of Potter, you have come to the deep to answer the 9th seal of the Concordat of the Deep Vaults. The bond asks of you 2 things, and I ask them now in the bond's name. It asks your blood, that it may know your line. And it asks your word, chosen by you and by no other, that it may know yourself. Give the deep your blood, and then give it your word, and the seal will judge between the 2 of them and you, and its judgment is the bonds, and the bonds is the nations, and there is no appeal from it under the mountain or above it. Your hand, warden, the blood first." Harry gave his hand. The needle touched the pad of his finger, a bright small point of cold, and a single drop of his blood welled up dark, and Skarnak guided the hand out over the answering basin of gold, over the bare blood seal, and the drop of the living blood of Hardwin Potter's line gathered at the fingertip and fell, and in the instant it left the child's hand and hung in the air of the deep, falling toward the peppercorn of blood that a man 3 centuries dead had sealed in gold so that his line could be found even in a cupboard. In that instant, the one instant in 374 years that the blood seal stood bare and unwarded, and the whole nation's eyes were fixed upon a falling drop of a child's blood and not upon the floor, Volgrak the warder of the descent, in the 3rd rank of the inner ring, loosed the thing he had carried down inside his coat, and learned in the mapped and stolen wards of the chamber to loose without the chamber knowing. It was not a blade, and it was not a spell that any tongue named aloud. It was a working, prepared and patient, a knot of malice tuned to the exact frequency of the blood seal's own warding so that the chamber would read it as part of itself and not as an intruder. And Volgrak loosed it in the falling of the drop, and it went for the bare seal, for the peppercorn of Hardwin's ancient blood in its skin of gold, to shatter it in the very moment of the answering, to break the sealed blood before the living blood could reach it, so that the two could never meet. So that the 9th seal would be neither answered nor cleanly lapsed but poisoned, ruined, the whole concordat sent broken into the wreckage of Claus the 11th, with no living warden, and no lawful heir, and no clean end. Only a shattered seal and a shattered right, out of which the patient and the lawful and the coldly waiting might in the seasons after draw whatever they could reach. It crossed the space between the 3rd rank and the altar with no sound and no light, because it had been made to be unseen, a cold gathering in the air like frost forming on the inside of a window, running low and close along the black stone toward the bare gold, and it was fast, faster than a called word, faster than a warder's hand, and it had one virtue that its maker had counted on above all others. The whole nation, 10,000 pairs of the sharpest eyes under the earth, was watching a drop of a child's blood fall, and not one of them was watching the frost. And 2 things happened in the space of that one heartbeat, the heartbeat that Albus Dumbledore had said, 4 watches and 100 years of experience before, was very often the whole of the difference between the men who arrive in time and the men who arrive to the wreckage. 1 heartbeat. It was all the reckoning had left, and it belonged, though none of them had planned it so, to the smallest person in the hall. The first was that far up on the surface, at the gate of the dragon, the instrument that Albus Dumbledore carried in a pocket he had mentioned to no one grew suddenly and fiercely warm against his ribs. A heartbeat before the deep understood what had been loosed in it, and the old wizard, who had already decided what he would do with that heartbeat, was moving before the warmth had finished blooming, though the gate was closed and the law forbade him and the dragon lay between. He did not try to pass the gate, because a wizard who forces the dragon's gate dies at the dragon's gate and helps no one. He did the one thing a wizard of his reach could do across a barrier he could not cross, which was to send not himself but a warning, a single lance of silver fire cast not at the seal, which he could not reach, and not at the traitor whom he could not see, but at the one mind in the deep he trusted to already be looking in the right place, a thread of light and intention flung down through stone at the speed of a decision, carrying no words, only the shape of an alarm. Aimed at a keeper who had spent 119 years learning to feel the deep and might, if the deep was kind, feel this. And the second was that Harry, whose blood was falling, whose whole small body the entire nation was watching, had heard under everything, in the still center of himself where he kept the true things and the unspoken word, the one voice in the domed hall that had told him the truth without wanting anything. You are the only person there small enough to see the floor. And Harry, in the heartbeat of the falling drop, with the eyes of the nation on his blood, was not looking at his blood. The whole world had slowed to the speed of the drop, the way the whole world slows for a child who has learned that the one moment everyone else is dazzled is the one moment the truth shows itself on the floor. And in that slowness Harry did what he had always done, what number 4 in the cupboard, in 6 years of noticing which stories had details had trained into the bone of him. While the tall and the powerful looked up at the bright and the falling, he looked down low at the height a small person sees, and no one else troubles to, at the feet in the inner ring, at the black stone at the boots of the warders. And he saw it. He had seen it once before in this room, a grain of shining chalk that a hall full of careful goblins had walked past because they were tall and it was low. He saw it now at the 3rd rank of the inner ring, at the boots of a warder of the descent, a fine pale grit sifting down onto the black stone even as he watched, the shining chalk dust of a curse-breaker's tracing powder, shaken loose from a coat that had carried it into a warded room a second time. And Harry's clear child's voice cut across the falling of his own blood and the beginning of the ruin and the whole assembled silence of the deep in the one word that could still be spoken before the right closed over all of them. Skarnak, the floor, the warder with the chalk on his boots, is doing it now. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, Lord of the deep vaults, a child's voice in a hall of the deep is a small thing, and the working Valgrak had loosed was faster than any voice, and by every reckoning that could be made in the ordinary counting of cause and moment, Harry's cry came too late to matter. The frost of malice was already at the altar. The bare seal already stood in its path, the living drop already hung in its falling. If the reckoning had been a thing of speed, it was lost, and Valgrak, who was no fool and had counted the speeds, knew it was lost, and permitted himself, in the third rank of the inner ring, the one expression he had allowed himself in a season of patience, which was the flat certainty of a being watching a plan arrive on time. But the reckoning was not a thing of speed. It never had been. That was the error folded into the whole of the coveter's craft, the error Prosper Vane had made with his writs and Emeric Grieve with his forged and hurrying deed, and Valgrak now with his tuned and racing frost. They had all of them believed that the reckoning was a race, and that whoever reached the seal first would own the moment. And the deep did not count the way they counted. The deep counted the way it had always counted, slowly and by weight and not by speed, and in the falling of the drop it was not asking which hand was fastest. It was asking one question, the only question it had ever asked, the question it had held unasked since a king it remembered sealed a bond it had witnessed, and the question was not who is quickest but who is true. The drop of Harry's blood met the peppercorn of Hardwin's blood in the basin of gold. And time in the domed hall of the undermost tier did a thing that time does perhaps once in the long memory of the deep. It did not stop, it deepened. It slowed until a heartbeat was a season, and the falling frost hung suspended a hand's breadth from the seal like a wave that has decided, for one impossible moment, not to break. And in that deepened instant the whole vast slow attention that Harry had felt gathering all through the right came down at last wholly upon the small point of him, warm in the enormous cold, and the deep woke to his blood, and knew him for Hardwin's line across 374 years. And having opened the door of the court with his blood, it turned to him the whole of its ancient regard and asked him, in the only way it could ask, which was not in words but in a pressure like the whole mountain leaning close to listen, the second half of the question. It knew his line, it did not yet know his self. And it would not answer the frost, would not lift a finger of its enormous power to keep or to break, until the warden it was being asked to wake for had told it, with a word of his own choosing, chosen by him and by no other, exactly who he was. Harry stood in the deepened instant with the frost hanging over the seal, and the nation frozen mid-cry around him and the mountain leaning down to listen. And he understood with the same quiet certainty that had shown him the clock and the light and the plant that grew toward a sun it could not see, that he was being offered a choice, and that the choice was larger than the seal and larger than the vaults and larger, in some way he could feel but not yet name, than his whole small life. For the deep in waking to him had shown him what it could do. It had laid the whole of its ancient power open to him in that instant, the way a tide lays open the whole of the sea to a stone dropped into it, and Harry felt, for one vast and vertiginous moment, that if he asked it, the deep would strike. It would reach up out of the roots of the mountain, and it would unmake Valgrak where he stood, would grind the traitor and the frost and the forgery in every hand that had ever reached for the vaults into the black stone and forget them, would answer the malice done to it with a wrath as old as the earth, and it would call that justice, and no goblin in the hall and no wizard on the surface would ever be able to say the warden had done wrong to defend his keeping with the power that was his by blood and bond to command. The deep offered him that. It offered a 6-year-old who had never in his life held a scrap of power over anyone, the oldest power under Britain, and it waited, leaning close to be told what he was so that it would know what to do. And Harry gave it his word. He did not give it the word of command it had shown him. He did not say strike or take or break or rule, though all of them were his to say, and the deep would have answered any of them and called it lawful. He had chosen his word 2 tides before in the goblin dark that had no morning in it, and he had chosen it not to please the room, because the room could not help him, and not to command the deep, because he had not then known the deep could be commanded, but because it was the smallest and truest thing in him, the whole of what was left when the cleverness and the reckoning and the wall he had built to keep number 4 out were all stripped away. It was the word of a child who had owned, in the whole of his 6 years, 3 things, a bottle cap and a marble with a frozen breath and a chess pawn from a gutter, and had kept them under a staircase against a world that took everything and gave nothing, and did not even give him the truth about where he came from. It was the word of a child who had turned being given nothing into the one art the cupboard could teach, which was the art of keeping what little was truly his, an old latch, a secret, a light held in the dark against the wind. He had not known when he chose it that it was also the coin the whole bond had been paid in, the word Hardwin had asked for in place of gold, the word Urgok had paid, the word 8 seals had darkened on across 3 centuries. He had chosen it only because it was true. And he spoke it now into the deepened instant to the leaning mountain, in a clear child's voice with no command in it at all, only a promise. Keep. The deep heard him. It heard the word, and it heard, folded inside the word the way the twist of white was folded inside his marble, the whole of the choice he had made with it. not strike but keep, not take but hold, not break the traitor but shield the seal, not answer the malice done to the deep with a wrath as old as the earth, but answer it with the one thing a warden was for, which was keeping. The deep had asked a child holding the oldest power under Britain who he was, and the child had answered that he was one who keeps, and had asked the deep with the same word not to destroy but to protect. And in that answer the deep found the thing it had waited 374 winters to find, which was not a lord to command it, but a warden to be trusted with it, not a hand that would use its power, but a hand that would keep its faith, and the deep, which does not love quickly and does not love often, but loves, when it loves, with the whole weight of the mountain, woke fully at last to its warden and moved. It did not strike. Harry had not asked it to strike, and so it did not, and that restraint, the restraint of an ancient and enormous power held in check by a child's true word, was more terrible and more beautiful than any wrath could have been. It kept. The frost of Volgrok's malice, hanging suspended over the bare seal, did not shatter the gold, because the deep would not let it. The black stone of the altar rose up around the seal in a slow bright wave of the interior light, not violent, not fast, simply certain, the way the tide is certain, and it took the frost of malice into itself and closed over it and unmade it, quenched it as the sea quenches a spark, without anger, without haste, keeping the seal exactly as a warden keeps what he is trusted with, which is completely and without drama and at whatever cost to himself. And the drop of Harry's blood, freed at last to finish its falling, came down into the basin of gold and touched the peppercorn of Hardwin's ancient blood, and the two bloods of the one line met across 374 years, and the ninth seal, the bright and sleeping seal, the last of the nine, took the answer it had been left waiting for and darkened. 8 had been 9, now 9 were 9, the light came up out of the deep. It came up through the black stone of the altar and through the floor of the domed hall and up the walls of living rock, a tide of the deep interior gold rising through everything at once, and it ran out from the seal chamber along the gallery of the undermost tier, and the 13 doors of the 13 deep vaults blazed, all of them together, not the faint closed-eye glow Harry had first seen, but a full and open radiance, 13 doors of black stone lit from within like 13 dawns. And the low unhearable note of the old magic that had run under everything since Harry first set foot on the 1000th stair climbed and broke at last into something that was almost music, a vast slow chord of the whole deep singing the one thing the deep had waited 3 centuries to sing, which was that the keeping was kept, the bond was answered, the warden was come, and the light of it poured up through the domed roof and through the gallery and up the 1000th stair itself, and far above on the surface. At the gate of the dragon, Albus Dumbledore felt the instrument in his pocket go cool and still against his ribs, and knew, without being told, that the heartbeat had been enough, and that it had not in the end been his heartbeat that mattered, and he found that he was glad and did not entirely understand why, and decided he would think about it later for a long time, which he did. In the domed hall, the frozen instant let go of the nation all at once, and time came back to its ordinary speed, and 10,000 goblins who had been caught mid-cry with their sharpest eyes on a falling drop of blood found themselves instead in a hall full of the risen light of the deep, with the 9th seal darkened and the 13 doors blazing, and a 6-year-old standing at the altar with his hand out over a basin of gold, and among them, in the 3rd rank of the inner ring, a warder of the descent named Volgrok stood alone in the light, with the unmade frost gone from his hands, and the plan he had counted arriving on time arrived instead at ruin, and every eye in the nation turning, now at last, toward the one place none of them had been watching. It was Nargpast who took him. The unreckoner had crossed off 28 of the 30 through the last watch of the tide, and Harry's cry had crossed off the 29th, and Nargpast, who had spent the whole right with the tally in his mind and his eyes on the 2 he had not cleared, was already moving before the light had finished rising, and he took Volgrok by the arm in the grip that goblin law reserved for a goblin false to the nation, a grip Harry had not seen before and hoped never to see turned on anyone he cared for. And he held the traitor in the risen light before the whole assembled nation, and he did not gloat, because there was no gloat in him, only the cold and terrible sorrow of an honorable being holding a dishonorable one of his own kind. "He is mine to name and yours to judge, chieftain," Nargpast said, and his voice carried in the singing hall. A warder of the descent, who turned the descent wards to bring a wizard's cursebreaker down to the seal chamber, and mapped the wards of the deepest keeping we hold, and sold that map, and loosed a working of malice at the blood seal in the very moment of the answering, to break the bond and ruin the reckoning, and send the whole concordat into the wreckage of Claus the 11th, so that the coveters might draw from the ruin what they could reach. He turned to Volgrok, and the sorrow in his face was harder to look at than anger would have been. "You did it in my name. You caught the anger of my creed and none of its honor, and you told yourself, I do not doubt, that you did it for the deep, because that is what I would have told myself if I had ever let the anger loose the honor. So I will say to you the thing I most needed to hear said, and never did, until a wizard child said it to me in a mint cavern 2 tides ago. There is a difference between an honest no and a treason. I gave the nation my no in the open on the letter, and I lost, and I bow to the losing, because that is what a goblin is. You gave the nation a knife in the dark and dressed it in my colors, and there is no bowing that answers for it. Do not think you serve the deep. The deep has just told all of us, in a language none of us can argue with, exactly whom it wished to keep it, and it was not you, and it was not me, and it was the child you tried to kill. And Valgrok, held in the risen light, looked at the blazing doors of the 13 and the darkened ninth seal, and the 6-year-old at the altar whom the deep itself had woken for, and whatever he had told himself through the long season of his patience fell away from him, and he did not speak, because there was nothing left to say that the light had not already said, and the warders took him, and the deep did not need to punish him. Because the deep had already done the worst thing that could be done to a goblin who believed the deep should be kept by the deep, which was to choose out of the whole nation a wizard child to keep it and to be right. Ragnok, high chieftain, stood at the altar in the risen light, and the reckoning came at last to its close, and it closed not with a striking of the hand upon stone, but with the oldest words the nation had spoken slowly into the singing hall. The ninth seal is answered, Ragnok said. The blood has answered the blood, and the word has answered the deep, and the deep has woken to its warden, and there is no appeal from it under the mountain or above it, for the bond does not adjourn, and the deep does not err, and the reckoning is done. Harry James Potter, heir of the house of Potter, of the blood of Hardwin, who kept faith with the mountain and asked nothing, the concordat of the deep vaults is fulfilled in you. You are warden of the deep vaults, keeper of the 13, holder of the seat that has stood swept and warded and empty for 374 winters against your coming. The wizards will style you lord of the deep vaults, and we do not object, provided every goblin who speaks it remembers what the deep has just taught the whole nation in a language of risen light, which is that a lord commands and a warden keeps, and that the deep chose the warden, and chose him because he would not command it even when it begged to be commanded, and asked it instead to keep. He inclined his head, the high chieftain of the goblin nation, to a 6-year-old in a coat that had been his cousin's, the precise degree that the nation gave to a warden of the deep vaults, which was a degree it had bowed to exactly one line of wizards in the whole of its history, and the whole of the nation bowed with him, 10,000 goblins in the risen light of the deep inclining their heads together to the small figure at the altar, and the sound of it, the vast soft sound of a nation bowing, was a sound Harry would keep in the place where he kept true things for the rest of his life. He did not know what to do with a nation bowing to him. He was 6, so he did the thing that was in him to do, which was the true thing, and it was, though he did not plan it so, exactly the right thing, the thing that told the nation it had chosen well. He did not draw himself up. He did not accept the bow as a lord accepts what is owed. He bowed back. He bent small in the risen light to the whole assembled nation of the deep, to the smiths and the reckoners and the warders and the mothers and the elders and the young ones held up on shoulders to see, and he held the bow the way Skarnok had taught him a goblin holds a bow he means. And when he straightened he said, in a clear child's voice that carried in the singing hall to the shadowed roof, the thing that closed the whole of it. The thing that a king 3 centuries dead had waited to hear a Potter say and had left a light on in the hope of hearing. Thank you for keeping it for me until I came, Harry said. I know it isn't mine. I know I only get to keep it, not have it. I've never had anything, so I know the difference better than most, and keeping is better. I'll keep faith with you the way my forebear did. Gold pays for goods. It doesn't pay for kindness. You kept faith with me for 300 years before you even knew my name, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life being worth it. And the nation, which does not weep and does not murmur and does not spend its feeling cheaply, stood in the risen light and gave the child the one thing it had left to give, which was silence, the deep and total silence of a whole people that has heard a true thing said in the one place true things are hardest to say, and held it, and let the words stand in the singing air unanswered, because some things are diminished by any answer but the keeping of them. Then the nation crowned him in the manner of the deep, which does not use a crown, because a crown is a thing wizards put on a head to say a person is above other persons, and the deep did not make its warden above. It made him answerable, which is the opposite office and the harder one. So there was no gold set on his brow. Instead, Skarnok brought from the altar a shallow bowl of the risen light itself, gathered from the answering basin where the two bloods had met, light that was liquid and was not water, the deep interior gold of the mountain's own heart, and he touched it to the pad of Harry's thumb, the same finger the needle had opened, and he drew with it upon the child's brow the 9-seal ring, 8 marks and 1, the sign of the concordat. In light that sank into the skin and left no stain, a surface I could see and yet was there and would be there for the whole of Harry's life, a mark the deep could read and the dragon could read and the doors of the 13 could read, the mark of a warden invested, so that wherever Harry Potter went in the world above and whatever else he became, and whatever heavier crowns other powers might one day try to press upon him, the deep would always know its own and would always at need at the true word keep him as he had sworn to keep it. As the light of the sign sank into his brow, The whole risen radiance of the hall drew inward and settled gently upon the small figure at the altar, so that for one moment Harry stood crowned after all, not in gold but in the gathered light of the deep, a child lit from within by the oldest magic under Britain, and the nation looked upon its warden crowned in living light and made the sound it made instead of a cheer, which was to strike once 10,000 hands flat upon the black stone floor. A single vast concussion that ran up through the mountain and was felt, they said afterward, in the foundations of the surface bank a mile above, one enormous heartbeat of stone by which the goblin nation of the deep acclaimed the lord of the deep vaults, aged 6, and meant it. The rest was law, and the goblins did law well and quickly and cleanly, now that the deep had spoken. Emeric Grieve was taken up into the surface and delivered by the nation's own hand to the ministry's own justice, with the forged deed and the sealed rubbing and the 2 registers as the whole of the case against him. And there was no defense a wizard court could make for a forgery that had named the wrong dead king. And House Selwyn, which had lent its name to the claim, spent a great deal of gold and a great deal of standing pretending it had never heard of Emeric Grieve, and was believed by no one. Which was its own kind of sentence. Prosper Vane filed nothing, there was nothing to file. The wardenship had not lapsed, there were no ownerless goods. The beautiful cold machine of a sheet he had built had been cut for a lock that no longer existed, and a man who keeps his edges square does not waste writs on a door that has been taken off its hinges. So he squared his notes and went up the 1000th stair, and back to his office that smelled of nothing at all, and he did not in the years that followed speak of the reckoning, though he was known once by a junior clerk to have kept on the corner of his blotter, squared precisely to the edge. A single grain of a shining pale grit that he never explained, and that the clerk took for chalk. The wider world learned of it slowly and imperfectly, and in the way the wizarding world learned of everything, which was through the leak, the rumor, and the flat denial that confirmed the rumor. It was said in the quiet rooms where old families weighed one another, that the Potter boy, whom everyone had half forgotten was still alive in some Muggle exile, had been down into the deep of Gringotts and come up with a goblin title older than the statute, and that the goblins, who bowed to no wizard and had spilled wizard blood in 7 risings over exactly the question of who owed what to whom, had bowed to him. Men who had never troubled to think of a 6-year-old thought of him now. In a drawing room in Wiltshire, a pale and elegant man who collected leverage the way other men collected wine set down his glass and asked his sources 3 careful questions, and received 3 unwelcome answers, and said nothing at all, because a man who has just learned that a child he might one day have wished to use has a wall at his back made of the whole goblin nation, is a man who revises his plans in silence. And in the older and stranger places, the places where a certain kind of attention still guttered like a banked coal waiting for its hour, the news reached whatever was left there to receive it, and was noted, and was added to a ledger of its own, under the name of a boy who kept surprising the people who counted on him being nothing. Harry knew none of this and would not for years, and it did not touch him, because the one wall that mattered had already been built, in the deep, in the risen light, out of a word he had told no one, and a nation that did not spend its bows cheaply, and walls of that make are not climbed by drawing-room men or by banked coals in a hurry. Volgrok answered to goblin law, which was not a wizard's law and was not gentle and was not cruel, and which is not ours to describe, because it belonged to the nation and the nation did not display it, and the deep kept its own counsel about the goblin who had tried to break it, as the deep kept its own counsel about everything in the end. And Nargpast, the honorable opposition, came to Harry before the warden went up the stair, and bowed to him low the full degree and meant it, exactly as he had promised in a cold mint cavern that he would if it came to this, and hated the necessity exactly as he had promised, and was loyal from that hour exactly as far as his oath required and not 1 degree warmer, which was, Harry came to understand across the years that followed, a very great deal further than the warmth of most people who smiled more. I wanted you to lose, Nargpast said without apology, because he was not a being who apologized for an honest position honestly held. I still think the deep should be kept by the deep, but the deep did not ask me. It asked itself in the oldest language it has, and it answered your name, and I am a goblin, and I keep my word, and my word is now to you. Do not make me regret that the deep has better judgment than I do, Warden. It would be a small and bitter thing to be proved right about my fears by a warden too careless to disprove them. Be worth the light it raised for you. That is the whole of what I ask, and I ask it as your truest servant, which is the same thing as your fiercest critic, and always was. I know, Harry said, you're the most honest one in the whole story. You were the first adult who ever told me the plain truth to my face. I'm going to keep you close so that when I'm wrong, somebody who isn't afraid of me will say so. And Nargpast looked at the child a long moment, and something in the cold accounting of his face shifted by a single degree toward something that was not warmth, because Nargpast did not do warmth, but was perhaps its stern and lasting cousin, and he inclined his head, and that was the beginning of the strangest and most useful friendship of Harry's long life, though neither of them would have called it a friendship, and both of them would have been wrong. They made him a warden's token of his own, that day in the risen light, before the doors of the 13 dimmed back to their patient glow. Skarnock brought it up from Vault I, the warden's vault, whose door had opened at last, for the first time in 374 years, to the hand of a living warden, warm under Harry's palm as it had been the day he first touched it, and inside had been not gold, for the gold of the deep was never a warden's, but the seat of the wardenship, the plain iron stand, and the token that matched the one Skarnock had carried up to a cold sitting room in Surrey, save that this one, struck fresh in the risen light, bore all 9 of its impressions dark, 9 seals answered, 9 conditions met, a bond 374 winters in the keeping, whole at last. Skarnock put it in Harry's hand and folded the small fingers over it with his gloved ones and said, "You will not carry this. It stays in the seat, but you will know it is there and that it is whole and that you made it whole, and that is a thing very few people in the world get to know about anything they have done. I bound myself the day the seal woke to answer for every word of the bond that brought you down the stair, as Bathrock Ironred bound himself 300 years before me. I am glad to report to my chieftain and to the deep and to you, warden, that every word has been answered, and that I would do it again, and that it has been the honor of 159 years underground to have carried a token up 1,000 steps and put it in front of a child on a carpet, and to have been right about him. Go up now, you are 6, and it is past the hour a warden your age should be awake, and the deep will keep, because that is what it does, and because now at last it is being kept by someone worthy of it." "Will you still be here?" Harry asked, and it was the one question he had that was not about vaults or seals or law, and it came out smaller than the others because it was the only one whose answer he was afraid of. "When I come back, I have to go back up. I don't get to stay. But the vaults are down here and the deep is down here, and I don't know how to be a warden of a place I can't get to. Will you still be here, or do I just get a title and then nobody, like everything else?" And Skarnock looked at the child and understood that of all the things he had been asked in 159 years underground, this was the one that most deserved a careful answer, and he gave it carefully. "A warden who cannot reach his keeping is why the office of steward exists," he said. "I have kept this archive for 119 years, and I have decided in the tide since your blood woke the seal that I will keep it for you now, which is the same work seen from a new angle and no burden to me, for I was doing it already for an empty seat, and it is pleasanter to do it for a person. I will be here. When you are on the surface, I will keep the deep. When you can come down, I will bring you what you need to know and hide nothing and flatter you in nothing, and tell you when you are wrong, which you will be, because you are 6 and will be 16, and both are ages that are wrong a great deal. I am your steward warden from this hour, by my own word freely given, which you now know is the only kind of chain my nation forges and the only kind that holds. You will not get a title and then nobody. You got a title and then me, and I am not nobody, and I do not leave a keeping ever, which is the whole of what I am, as keeping is the whole of what you turned out to be. We are well matched. Go up. I will be here when you come down, and I will be here the time after that, and the time after that, for as long as there is a warden to keep the deep for and a keeper left to keep it. That is not a comfort I am inventing to send you up the stair smiling. It is a fact, and facts are my trade, and I have never yet sold you a false one." Harry went up the 1,000th stair a warden, and the pale blind dragon at the 9th landing lifted its great filmed eye and knew his blood now, knew it as the blood of the seat it guarded, and made a sound that was not a warning, a low tremendous note that Harry felt come up through the soles of his shoes and understood without being told was the nearest a dragon 400 years at its post could come to a bow, and he stopped and put his hand for a moment against the vast pale flank of the ward that would guard his keeping for as long as it lived, and said thank you to it too, because it had let him by twice and would let him by forever, and then he went on up into the surface, into the ordinary world, changed. Albus Dumbledore was waiting at the gate, as the law had required and his heart had insisted, and he walked the child back across the surface, and he did not ask what had happened at the altar, because he had felt the instrument go cool against his ribs and knew the shape of it, and because he had learned in a hard century that the surest way to make a person tell you a true thing is to be worth telling it to and then to wait. Harry told him some of it, not the word, never the word. But some of it on the walk in the plain way he told true things, and Dumbledore listened, and asked 1 or 2 questions that were the questions of a man who wanted to understand and not the questions of a man who wanted to manage. And by the end of the walk the old wizard had revised quietly in the private place where he kept the accounts he showed no one, a great many of the plans he had made for the shape of the years ahead. Because a boy who could hold the oldest power under Britain in his hand for 1 instant and answer it with the word keep was a boy who would need less managing and more trusting than Albus Dumbledore had trusted anyone in a very long time. And Dumbledore found, walking beside him in the ordinary evening, that he wanted to be worthy of the trusting, which was a wanting he had not felt in so long that it took him most of the walk to recognize it, and when he did, he was quiet and glad. And a little afraid in the good way, the way a person is afraid at the top of a swing going up. They took Harry back to Privet Drive, because it was, in law and for now, his home, and because the blood ward there still had its work to do for reasons that had nothing to do with vaults and would matter in time more than vaults. But it was not the same house that received him, because it could not be, because Petunia Dursley opened the door to a child a nation had bowed to. And though she did not know that and would never be told the half of it, she knew something had changed, because she had handed a boy out the door in a coat that had been Dudley's and been asked by a goblin on her sitting-room carpet whether her sister's son was safe, and had said he'll need his coat, the blue one, and had meant, in the only language she had left, be careful. Come back, and he had come back. He stood on the step in the ordinary evening in the too big blue coat, and he looked up at his aunt, and something passed between them that was not warmth, because number 4 did not do warmth, but was perhaps its distant and grudging cousin, an acknowledgment, the acknowledgment of a woman who had spent years insisting the magic was not real, and had opened her door to find it standing on her step in her nephew's shape, and had not in the end been able to keep insisting. Wash your hands before supper, Petunia said, which was the only thing she knew how to say, and which meant, in the only language she had, you are alive and you are mine, and I did not know how much I would mind if you were not. And Harry washed his hands and ate the supper that was, that night, and never explained and never repeated, a slightly larger portion than usual, with the burnt corner cut off, and he did not remark on it, because he had learned that some kindnesses are diminished by any answer but the keeping of them, and he kept it. That night he lay on the thin mattress in the cupboard under the stairs, which he would not sleep in for very many more months, though he did not know that yet, and he took out the 3 things that were his, the bottle cap and the marble with the frozen breath and the chess pawn from the gutter, and he laid them out on the shelf he had oiled and looked at them in the strip of hall light, and he understood that they were no longer the only things he kept. He kept now the seat of a wardenship and a token 9 seals whole, and the faith of a nation that did not spend its faith cheaply, and the memory of a girdle that sang, and the silver words of a man who asked nothing and left a light on, and a word he had spoken to the deep that he would never tell a living soul, and the sound of 10,000 goblins bowing, and the knowledge, new and enormous and quiet, that there was a place in the world, the deepest place there was, where his whole purpose was to keep something safe, and where he was wanted not for what could be got from him, but for what he had shown at the altar in the risen light that he was. He held the marble up to the strip of hall light and turned it, and watched the frozen breath inside it turn, and he thought, as he had thought on another evening a lifetime and a season ago, about the plant that grew toward a sun it could not see, and he understood at last the whole of the thing he had known that night without having the words for it. A thing could know where the light was even in a dark room if the light had shone on it once long ago before the room. He had been that plant. He had grown toward a sun he could not see and could not name and had never been told the truth about, and the sun had been there all along, 374 winters deep under a mountain, kept warm by a nation for a child it had not yet met, because a man 3 centuries dead had done one right thing and refused to be paid for it, and had left, in a drop of blood sealed in gold, a way for the light to find the plant even in the dark, even in the cupboard, even if no one knew its name. Kindness was still a bond. He had answered it, and it had answered him, and the reckoning was done, and the deep would keep. Harry Potter, Warden of the Deep Vaults, Lord of the 13, 6 years old, put the marble back on the old shelf beside the bottle cap in the pawn, and pulled the too big blue coat over himself for the warmth, and slept, and far below him, deeper than the dragon, deeper than the 1,000th stair, in a gallery of 13 doors that glowed the color of the inside of a closed and peaceful eye, the deep kept its warden the way it kept everything, completely and without drama and forever. Chapter 7.